The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
The questions you always had, the answers you were never given, the place to seek the truth. Welcome to Veritas.
Greetings to everyone around the world, and a warm welcome to a new season of Veritas, Season 8. I'm your host, Mel Fabregas, and I sincerely thank you for joining me once again. And if this is your first time, or your truth journey brought you here, welcome home. And to listen to tonight's season premiere, a 3-hour interview with Clif, all you have to do is go to veritasradio.com and subscribe. For just pennies a day, you will have access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of truth that you will not get in the mainstream media. Right at the beginning, I want to thank everyone for all your support as we begin Season 8. And the only reason why we're still here is because of you, Veritas member. And for the holidays, or if you don't celebrate the holidays, that's fine. You can still give a Veritas subscription to a friend or to a loved one. Make a difference with the truth. And Season 7 of our futuristic metal-cased USB drive is now available. And did you know that you can purchase individual interviews now? They are available after 90 days of their original broadcast. By the way, check the Veritas store. We have new products now, very exciting, fulvic acid, and even full vibration machines. Check it out. And if you want to get in touch with me, have a suggestion, comment, or would like to be on this radio program, just click on the contact button of our website. And tonight, for season number 8, we have someone who has become a fixture on this radio program at the beginning of every season. A good friend of this program who does not need an introduction. And I'm referring to Clif from halfpasthuman.com. Well, Clif, welcome back to Veritas.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased that we're both still here.
Absolutely. And, right this morning, you sent me the new ALTA report. I'm touching it. It's still hot, right from the press. It just came out this morning, correct?
Correct. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's been as you can imagine, the amount of data we've got is just tremendous. So just plowing through this stuff has just been, we've been shoveling it out of the way to get at the nuggets that are worth reporting. There's that much. Most of it stemming from the horrific escalation in terrorist and supposed terrorist attacks.
One thing I did notice was the gap. Usually you have covering 2015 to 2017, but right now I see covering 2015 to 2022. Why the big gap between years?
Because we're getting a flush of long-term data. The way it works is that people get all hyped, emotionally upset. Their defenses, if you will, their inbuilt narrative that keeps them from recognizing their own psychic nature breaks down. And in times such as these, in the extremes, right, of emotional highs and lows, you get this breakthrough. And when you get a breakthrough like this, we get tons of long-term data being brought in with the language. So, for instance, they may be discussing their reaction to any number of these terrorist attacks, and in somewhere in that paragraph or two, there's a hint of something else that the data set picks up and then brings into the lexicon, and we're able to say, okay, this is a long-term data bleed through, and so that's what causes the range that we're discussing to vary. Make sense?
Absolutely. And by the way, this report is available for sale now, today, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's on the Half Past Human site. Yeah, you
Great.
can go get it. Yeah.
Before we get to discuss the ALTA report and Terra, which is the first item on your list, let's discuss the latest shooting in San Bernardino, California. We've been told it was terrorism, but at first it seems that the gun grabbers were out minutes after the event happened. What's your take on this?
Let's back up, or let's take a high elevation view of this, okay? Because in the nature of my mind and my work, especially these past numbers of years, I have a tendency to concentrate on evolving or manifesting patterns. And therefore, I get into a situation where the very first thing I examine is there, or do we see any clues in any event that's placed before us in any of the media that brings out pattern recognition? And so we see that, yes, there is one. San Bernardino, they had no less than 9 active ongoing drills in that immediate area within 4 miles. Okay, so they had all these police drills going on. That's true in every single one of these media-hyped attacks, okay? And so we see that is indeed one flag. In Paris, for instance, they had active drills. They had their SWAT teams right there. The police are always within minutes when this occurs. On 9/11, they had all those 119 dump trucks lined up ready, waiting to go as part of an exercise, and so on and so on. So yes, we have that pattern there. Now, do we have other patterns, such as, is there a plethora of videos? No, there's not. And therefore, this is another pattern, such as the supposed shooting in the concert in France. Where are all the videos? If you've got 50,000 people, I suspect you've got close to 48,000 cell phones, each of which have cameras that are phenomenal and the ability to record and get onto the internet. So where are the videos? We don't see that in San Bernardino either. And so we say, yes, this is another one of these. It matches a pattern that I find disturbing. And then you have to ask yourself, are you a coincidence theorist or are you a conspiracy theorist? If you're a coincidence theorist, then you believe all this stuff just is mere coincidence, and the repetition of coincidence in no way makes it a pattern, such that, 9 recent attacks, and each of those attacks all had police drills or military drills ongoing at that moment, in no way establishes a pattern in the mind of a coincidence theorist. If that's your belief system, then you will see this as the media wants you to understand it. Otherwise, you'll start examining for other clues, and you'll find that there's a whole lot of stuff you can look at should you decide you want to go down any individual opening into the giant rabbit warren. And so I think of these as individual rabbit holes, which you could go down to through. So you could just choose any of these shootings, any of the terrorist attacks, and use that as your entrance, and then you'll plop down. It's not a single hole. You'll find yourself in a warren with all the rest of us scurrying around saying, wait a second, I got here by that door. How did you get to this same spot? And it's all the same spot no matter what door you go down. I mean, I don't mean to make light of the people being killed, et cetera, but I will note that, every single government in the Western world has on paper somewhere a admission that, yeah, it's acceptable for them to kill 18 or 20 people or 100 people in order to motivate the nation. And they see this as no big deal. And so that being the case, you have yet another pattern. And thus I fall into the idea of, I'm going to question this and assume that because we live in the age of information, we know absolutely nothing in terms of what is true. Unless you can actually go out there and pat it with your hands and look at it, and even then there's some suspect about that, I would suggest that you don't know anything that's true, and thus it's all speculation. So I don't accept what the media tells me is being true about any of these shootings. And I'm not, because I've seen the pattern repetitiously now in the last 9 situations, I don't propose to follow it any further. I don't see any point in having my mind twisted by following their trails. Sort of makes sense?
It does, but if it's terrorism, which is what we're told today, how dare politicians continue to bring gun control to the surface? Take gun-grabbing Geraldo Rivera commenting on the shooting when allegedly his own daughter was at that concert in Paris Wasn't she a sitting duck over there?
One would presuppose that, yes. And we also have to juxtapose we have to look at the conjunction. Okay, here you have an incident which the government uses the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, and proposed solution, and they're implementing it. And instantly, another part of the pattern is somebody's agenda is instantly slapped up against the outside of the event, surrounding it such that within your mind you're not able to separate it. Therefore, all of these shootings instantly they slap up the gun grab approach, right? And let's always remember, we live in, quote, a developed country, okay? And so it makes sense to look at history. In no case, or the very first case of a developed nation on this planet getting absolute total control of guns was 1935 and Hitler. And they said right then, the day that was achieved, hooray, hooray, now the police are safe and the government may pursue its required goals or agenda. I think it was goals, but German translation, at the moment, I can't really remember. In any event, though, the very first incident we had of successful gun control was Germany in the 1930s. And we all know how that movie played out, right? So I would suggest that if I were Jewish, I could not, as a person, I would not ever accept any kind of gun control language in my presence. I would be very, very, very fierce in beating it down, simply because as a Jew, I would know in history's times, successful gun control equals slaughters of Jews. And we have this as a one-to-one correlation with the only ever successful gun control resulted in this. Ergo, I must assume that this next successful gun control will also result in this. And therefore, if I were any minority, I would also say, hey, I'm going to go along with the Jews on this. They have history here, and maybe this all makes sense. So in that regard, I think that the pattern is well established, that as soon as you've got an agenda slapped up against it, then you know that someone drove the initial event. They're not merely taking advantage of it. So as soon as I see an agenda, I go and I look for the drills. Or as soon as I see the drills, I go and I look for an agenda to pop up. As soon as those pop up, you can dismiss it as yet another one of these unfortunate episodes that the government's engineering.
You know, one thing it's true about the Hitler law, it did prohibit Jews and other persecuted classes from owning guns, but the actual law that Hitler signed was actually the opposite. You know, he had revisions to deregulate the acquisition of and transfer of rifles and shotguns, as well as ammunition. And it also, while the legal age of purchase was lowered from 20 to 18, permit lengths were extended from 1 year to 3 years. So it was not as severe as some people claim it to be or to have been.
No, but we also have to understand that the first law that was signed in 1935 was subsequently followed by amendments in late 36, I believe, that extended the range of the populace that was not able to own guns to anybody they declared to be mentally incompetent for any reason whatsoever. And that's when they started using the psychiatry against political dissidents. By making them mental incompetents, they couldn't proceed to vote, they couldn't own guns, et cetera, et cetera. They also extended it to people that were deemed to be genetically inferior, and that's when they started getting into the Superman issues. And it was just an entry point, the thin edge of the wedge. It was not designed to be the end-all, be-all. And you'll note that that's how the Fabians are trying to do it here in the U.S. They're not saying, hey, let's grab all the guns. They're saying, oh, no. This particular kind of a weapon is bad. And this particular kind of a bullet is bad. And all other bullets are either good or neutral in our opinion now. And then later on, they'll say, something else happened here, and, this bullet is bad. And that's the way that it proceeded in England, because and they try and get the assault rifles. And I agree, excuse me, homeowners have no real reason for having an assault rifle and claiming it to be a hunting weapon. If I owned such a weapon, which I don't because it's just not in my nature, I'd be upfront and candid about it. No, it's not a hunting weapon. I'm frightened to death of my government weapon. And I'm with the 32.5% of the populace that now recognizes or thinks that the USA government is their number one enemy. And so under those circumstances, I would be at least upfront and honest with myself about, no, it's not a hunting weapon. I'm in with Patrick Henry in the Second Amendment group in that sense, that the greatest threat to peace and stability is a government out of control. And I would say that ours certainly qualifies. And therefore, I'm a realist, and I have to recognize that I had relatives that went through that experience in Germany, that got out in the 1939 period. And these individuals had a lot to say about what was happening relative to the social order, which even with the gap in our generations filtered down to me through my father, because he used to listen to their stories. So I'd say, I have personal family history that says A, B, and C are bad. I look out and I see, there's A. Maybe B and C are on the way. I'm not going to sit around and wait for it.
They really want to try to take guns away from us, but they keep giving them through them, quote unquote, through Benghazi. But that's a different story. But also, yesterday when I saw the news, the first thing you turn on all the channels, the first thing you hear is, it's believed the suspects were armed with long guns, not handguns. And you heard that again and again. And as you say, they want to just talk about long handguns, rifles, assault
Correct.
Rifles, and so on, and then it becomes a slippery slope. But here's another fact that they're not talking about. In 2012, the latest year over which data is available, 64% of deaths from gun violence were suicides, compared with 57% in 2006. Why is that the media doesn't show that the majority of gun deaths were committed by suicide? Isn't that convenient for them not to talk about?
Yeah, certainly, but I don't expect anything out of the media. I don't watch TV. I don't turn on those channels. Anything that's coming from corporate is not worth my attention. Because
for laughs, maybe.
But even then, it pollutes your mind, and I have to be careful about that at very many different levels. So I don't want to get front loaded. So I don't, for instance, go and read prophecy sites or prediction sites. Right? I have to be careful about who I'm talking to during the process of doing reports, and I've come over time to understand that there's some very nasty inbuilt subliminals in basically all of the media, and I'm better off living without them. But no, I don't expect anything out of the propagandists other than propaganda and lies. So of course they're going to ignore the overall degradation of the social order that we're living in and tout the view that the false image presented by the powers at the top, who wish to remain at the top even though the hill is crumbling out from underneath them. They just don't want to come down with the rest of us is all. But their view is paid for and shipped through the media. So no, sorry, Guy. It's kind of saying asking the media to be truthful these days is like asking an alligator not to eat the chicken sitting next to its nose. It ain't going to happen.
Now, Paris, Bataclan. Yeah, you probably have seen the pictures, unless you didn't want to pollute your mind. But all the bodies, and people are not noticing this, just a few, all the bodies seem to have been dragged. You see the blood trails dragged to position. And
sure,
I like to watch the news immediately after, because a lot of times they're edited months later or they're removed. And one thing I did notice, that one woman, a young woman there, called her family in Mexico to say that she was alive. An hour later, she was found dead.
Yes, I'm aware of that episode, right. The shocking part of it was not only was she alive, but she was supposedly in protective custody of the French anti-terror police. And so I would presume in my own case now that if I saw any kind of a police organization in my country, they are not my friends necessarily, even in the remote rural areas in which I live. And I'm going to be very careful about how I handle myself around them. And I personally would never assume that being taken into protective custody was a good thing. But that's basically what happened, is that, the assassination team that was sent out to kill all these people and make it look like make it look like a terrorist attack, swooped up a bunch of people that were not too tightly controlled, and she was not the only one that reported that she was alive. There are two other instances, not of voice recordings, but of social media reports.
A Belgian man.
Exactly, where the people then ended up in the pile of dead people, even though they had said, hey, I'm alive, I'm over here, I'm safe, don't worry, and I'm in police custody. And then, as you say, 2 hours later, their body is in the pile, having shown signs of being shot elsewhere and drug over there. But something even beyond all of that, okay? I don't really like concentrating on the victims of these things. It's necessary that we look at it and recognize the horror of the time we live in. However, the very first thing that occurred that shocked me or that I noticed was the link between the Economist January 2015 cover of the
yes.
Cheshire Cat, and the fact that the amphitheater that this is all taking place in, the Bataclan, has as its symbol the Cheshire Cat on all the sides in duplicate. On each side of the entrance, on every entrance there, on each side of the entrance, you'll find an image of the Cheshire Cat. And so in January, the Economist knew that something was going to go down involving this site. I do not think that, like myself, they pursue predictive linguistics without and thus are just guessing that something involving a Cheshire Cat or, something involving arrows that turn out to give 11/13/2015 as a date are psychic coincidences. In their case, because they're a Rothschild
Rothschild family, correct.
Correct. They're owned by the Bauer family, who claim to be the Rothschilds. It's a Jewish family that converted their name in the 30s or 20s, I believe, and have lived under the name of Red Shield ever since. And the Red Shield group owns The Economist and puts out every year at least one predictive cover on what they plan to do with the planet over the rest of that year. And so you notice that we have a bunch of interesting other images on that cover that we have yet to have, quote, fulfilled. We've had some interesting ones, like what's his name in the pig episode in England, the British politician and the sexual antics with a dead pig head being referenced on the cover of The Economist. So they knew they were going to out this guy then. And if you actually went ahead and read it in a particular way, in a symbolic way, you can count the number of individuals on the cover and relate it to the passage of time, look how these things are playing out, and make our guess as to which one's up next. This is not really the time to go into that, but it's an interesting little thing should anybody want to just grab an image of that cover and look at the people and see the ones that are in color versus black and white, and how the layout is. It's a calendar. And so they're telling you what's going on, going to happen when. And there's still 2 items left for this month.
And coincidentally, this is the actual image I used as the art for tonight's show. I have it right here in front of me. If
You're kidding?
No, not really. I had it right.
Well, you're a psychic son of a bitch, hey.
I have it right here with me, and I'm looking at all the things. For example, if anybody's, just go to Google Images, folks, if you're listening, or because the image that I have for the show is so much small. But if you magnify it, you can take a look. For example, Merkel. Merkel has her hands in a way of a pyramid, which she's just putting her hands in front of her, and the button looks like the all-seeing eye. And if you look at Merkel these days, what has happened to her? I mean, the influx of immigrants, and again, I'm not really an anti-immigrant person, but I also think that if you cannot handle your own home, you cannot bring so many people that's going to disturb your own home. And what's happening in Germany is just beyond my comprehension. What's your take on what's happening in Germany and the rest of Europe?
It's part of a larger plan. Okay, it's happening in the Americas, both north and south. It's soon going to happen in Africa. And to a certain extent, it is underway in many parts of Asia. And it's part of this overall, I don't want to say UN, let's just say the Rothschilds. Okay, they're the richest people on the planet. That's the absolute fact. That one individual family owns more than
trillions.
Every other. Owns more than the rest of the planet combined, okay? So let's just say that if we follow the money, these guys are the boss. All right, so let's just say that the boss of the planet has an agenda that does not like strong popular cultural values. So in other words, they don't want a strong Germany with a cultural identity that the German people can hold by looking out and seeing the reflection of themselves in a more or less monothematic or monochromatic fashion. Okay, it doesn't have to do with race. It has to do with culture. So it wouldn't matter what if the invading quote refugees were actually Germanic people. It would not matter, because what the boss wants is this cultural conflict. It's necessary that the cultural conflict exist at a global level in order to break up the idea, in order to achieve several different aims. One of which is the disruption of the idea of sovereign states or geopolitical identity, because they can't have that. That sort of mindset doesn't work for them for their longer range plans that they have for humanity at this stage, in my opinion. I'm not of the opinion that they want to do depopulation. In fact, I think that they're actually going to work very diligently to raise and keep the population very high as long as they can, up against the coming struggles that we face as humans in our immediate environment of the expanding Earth and the climatic disasters and so on. The powers that be need the population base, because the goal is to get us off this planet, to get them off this planet. And in order to do this, they could have a long time ago chosen to go with tight, solidified cultural groups and play them off against each other. But because of certain things going on in the background, which we can discuss at some other point or later on here, they chose to go the other opposite way, which was to shatter the cultural barriers that separate all the people, stir them all up and mix them all together, and try and create a homogeneous mass that can be directed. And the homogeneous mass is, they understand, going to be running at a higher level of continual antagonism as all these different cultures, once the culture is broken up, as all the various different groups rub shoulders with each other and try and adjust and so on, it's going to create a level of cultural friction that the powers that be are going to attempt to use in their agenda to create a let's just say a pan-global vision of humanity that they'll try and use to get us to lift them off the planet. Now, they'll do that by basically trying to create the sort of image of Earth and our individual relationship with other people on Earth that would have been required to create the Star Trek kind of technology. Does that in any way make sense?
It does make sense, and I keep looking at this picture. I'm still analyzing as you're speaking. I'm looking at Putin here. If you magnify somewhat, you can see on his sunglasses, one of them is broken, almost as if somebody shot him.
Right.
Do you think that he's against the powers that be, or is this just a facade?
No. I think people have continually always misinterpreted Putin. He was an honest nationalist in the old days when he was in the KGB. He's not the avaricious. He's not motivated by money. He can get as much as he wants through as much graft as he wants, and he's just not motivated by it. He's a Russian peopleist or a populist. It's not even really the Russia as a geopolitical state. It's Russia is his basic core. He's a Paruski, okay? He speaks Russian, and his family is of the old Russians. It goes all the way back through the Ovs in terms of the language, Romanov, these kind of people are the old Russians. And so Putin derives his individual identity as a part of this meme or myth of the great Russian peoples. And so you'll see him acting out that image all the time as the heroic man against nature in the north.
Romanov as in the Tsars, you mean?
Yeah, but it predates them. The Romanovs took the OF or OV and attached it to their name in order to make themselves be part of the be part of the older people. But you see it in all kinds of Russian names. Popov, any of the OF, OV names are the original Russian peoples, and the Russian peoples have an identity mythology that is very similar in some minor respects to that of the Israelis or the Jews, in the sense that they have this mythology that at the beginning of the Russian people, there were these X number of Russian tribes. There were, the Popovs, and it just goes on, and it delineates these family names. And so if you have anybody in your family that is from any of these other ancient families, then you're one of the ancient Russians. And Putin is of the ancient Russian lineage. And as I say, he's acting out that identity with the Russian populace at that level. And that's why he's so beloved by all the other Russians, because he is acting as an archetypical representation for them in these current times. Now, he's not stupid. He's very well educated. He's a military policeman. He's also a contracts expert.
Martial artist.
Correct, and he's actually a Kano jujitsuist, okay, or a judoist, but he's not a judo player in the sense of a like the Olympic kind of competition judo, but nonetheless, the point is that he's a grappler, and as another grappler, I fully understand what he does and how he does things, and it's just such a shock to all these individuals that he lets you maneuver and get everything, and then he steps in real close and flips you very rapidly. So, it's the speed that that has frightened all of the powers that be, because they're just not prepared for that kind of thing to be acting out now. So as a Russian nationalist, he is at this point not in any way acting in the interests of the powers that be, and has incurred the wrath of the Rothschilds in various different forms, year after year after year after year. They have to tolerate him. They bring him into some of these events because they can't deal with certain issues without him. He's very much knowledgeable about what's going on. You notice that he's been telling more and more of the truth as he goes out in public. 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think he would be addressing he would have had these conditions existed 5 or 6 years ago. I'm certain he would have taken the same tact. But what he does is, he lets the Prime Minister Turkey go on and on and on and deny and deny and deny and make all these absurd statements, and then he comes out with absolute proof that the guy is a corrupt, lying asshole, and shows him up for what he is. And Putin has all kinds of information that he'll be releasing as is warranted, but there's no need for him to release any of this ahead of time. It's not like he's itching to cause a fight or whatever, but as at a personal level, as a judo artist, he's a get in close, real quick, and into flipping somebody around. So it's not war at a distance. Let's digress for a second, okay, into an interesting bit of social thinking about the human race and other kinds of beings. Okay, so it exhibits in other species as well. And I can't think of the two guys' names, but they two of these sociologists, I think they got or archo-anthro-sociologist. I'm not sure really how they identify themselves, but I think one of them got a prize. I don't know if it was Nobel or not, but they came up with this very interesting analysis. And they said that there's basically two types of any given individuals. And as the species you're dealing with rises up in, they termed it intelligence, but let's just say consciousness, the ratio of the two individual types within that species changes. And we can identify these two individual types as R or K types. Now, they chose R and K. I didn't. And I find that somewhat... as we'll go forward, you'll see it's somewhat erroneous, I think, or just an irritating choice to use the K word. But in any event, let's say that these two people, or these two types, are the R and the K levels. Now, the R's in society can be thought of as people that are quite content to allow others to make the decisions and to direct them while conditions are suitable for the R mind. And so you could say, for instance, that the R mind is like a rabbit and sees all of the planet as an infinite field of clover. not recognizing that its sight is limited, and therefore it can't see that the field ends just 5 feet out of its horizon, on the other side of its horizon, and that the field of clover is not infinite, and therefore it should not breed willy-nilly, eat all day, and party all the time. So this is sort of an ant and grasshopper kind of a thing, only we're not dealing with ants. We're dealing with personality types that can be likened to the R's, or the rabbit in the infinite clover field, and a pack of wolves, the K types, okay? And the pack of wolves knows that regardless of what the rabbit thinks and how fast it breeds, there's only so many rabbits for it to eat. And so the pack of wolves does a few things that the rabbits don't. It invests a lot of time in each and every one of its offspring and does not breed indiscriminately, because it knows that if it were to produce 5 pups in an area where only 3 could be supported, then it's creating a problem for its own offspring and is destructive to its own purpose in life, which is the furtherance of its DNA at that level. And we're sort of discussing things at that level at the moment. And so here's the difference when you translate these ideas. So for instance, the K people are aware that the field is limited, that resources are limited. They like being aware of problems coming along. Many people that you and I know that are in the what we would think of as the conspiracy world are K people by nature, because they feel a responsibility, as I do, for the provision of those people for whom I'm responsible, and therefore I want to make sure I can get my hands on the resources to provide to them. Therefore, I look out ahead of those resources being used, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of the K mentality. And you see that the R people don't really think that way. They're quite content to indulge, if you will, at a conscious level here in the bread and circuses, never really questioning or desiring to question the orchestration of the bread and circuses and why, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the ratio of R to Ks in society changes over time. So you'll notice that you find things in history where you have sociologists, philosophers, analysts, these kind of people say, and they'll say republics begin Stoic and end Epicurean. Okay, so they begin willing as Stoic people to put off today's gratification for the furtherance of their future generations. And so they're Stoic about their own suffering and accept it as and in fact, to a certain extent, glorify it, the 300 Spartans, all of this kind of thing, as a necessary part of the furtherance of the society. And therefore, these are great individuals because they were Stoic and they held these ideals and lived up to them. And the societies end in the Nero fashion as epicures, where they are no longer Hadrian at the bridge defending, the empire, but in fact are willingly inviting in the Visigoths and giving them damaged and degraded money and getting them to be mercenaries to go and fight other people to try and get more gold, et cetera, et cetera. So they're just participating in their own demise at the R level. And so the Epicureans grow over time because the society actually, it's really a kind of an interesting idea when you look at it from a very high perspective, because you start off with a society of Stoics, and what allows the Epicureans to exist is the ratio of Stoics in the initial part of it all that are willing to put aside their needs of the moment and so forth for the future. And what does the future do but turn into Epicureans? You see my point, right? So Putin, in acting the way he is, he's representing the K faction of humanity, and there's a real interesting thing about this in The Art of War. Okay, you find that, and this is not from The Art of War, but Sun Tzu, but rather from what they teach in the War College in Leavenworth. And so in the Army War College, if you go through that at the officers' levels there, they teach you that wars are really interesting, that some wars are fought by people that are tentative about it. Well, it turns out that the tentative war people are always like what we would call chicken hawks, the neocons and the neoliberals that have never been to war. There are type personalities that are sort of got a little hint of the vision of the K personality, and they go to war for all these different kind of reasons. But they are not like a K person, because here's the thing. As a K personality, I know When you go to war, you unleash holy hell and you get it over with and you slaughter as many as your enemy as you can. And if you have to, you slaughter their kids so that you never, ever, ever have to face that situation again. So when it comes time for us to, as a humanity, to get rid of the last of the monarchs, should they not surrender peacefully, it will be time for humanity to do some really nasty, brutal things and kill innocent, as far as their situation, children, because we cannot have them growing up to claim the crown.
You get rid of the bloodlines.
Correct. So that's a K personality thinking. Okay. Our personality is, let's go bomb them for 5 or 6 years and do this and that and the other thing, right? Because our personality sees this is just basically the infinite field of clover, and there's some minor stuff going on it, which will continue forever, and it's not a threat, et cetera, et cetera. But and in fact, the R personalities, when you get right down to it, are quite content and love the idea of war. And that's why the United States is currently at perpetual war, is because after the great generation that suffered in World War II and all those people died, for us it really was not a death toll. I mean, our level of death compared to the Russians or any other of the nation states really involved was minor. But nonetheless, we had a social change. In the 50s, the relative proportion of the R population rose dramatically. And here's something about that. You'll always find that the R's are the chicken hawks, and they're more than willing to send off lots and lots and lots of the K-type personalities that volunteer to join in the war, because the K personalities, that's what we do, is that, when war breaks out, you need us to get in there and kick ass and be brutalized ourselves by the process, but it's part of that Stoic mindset. I know I don't want to kill people, but if it comes down to it, I'm going to just be the most horrific, bloody killing machine you can imagine, simply because it's necessary for the long-term survival of the society. And that's sort of the underlying narrative or meme that's operating within the K mindset. But here's the R mindset. The R mindset is, we're not in any real risk. Why don't we send off all of these really athletic, pumped-up K-types to get slaughtered? That means there's more women for me to screw. And that's really the functional motivation within all these societies over time as the R values escalate. Because you'll see that other things occur as Stoicism is set aside and Epicureanism comes on into place. And you'll see all of those things being manifest in our society now. And it's egregious. It's been activated and preyed upon in a way not usually seen in other societies, I don't think, by the Israelis and their masters, the Rothschilds. And let's not forget, by the way, that the Merkaba symbol in the Israeli flag was put there by the Rothschilds. The populace voted for the symbol of peace, the menorah, and Rothschild said, nope, you're going to have my symbol, which is the Merkaba. And they have it to this day. But in any event, in our society, we see things like, hyper-sexualization, the sexualization of the society being driven down into younger and younger ages, as well as being ritualized in various different fashions, such that it's more and more acceptable to quote the mainstream. This occurs over time with the rise of the R personality types. Stoics do not behave in this manner, and you can track Stoic civilizations or you can track republics as they go through these various different phases over time, and see that the patterns are repetitious. And again, we're back to the whole thing about pattern recognition. And yep, here we are. We've got an interesting pattern at the moment, and that is that we're at the peak into the point of failure of the dollar empire. And that's really how I characterize it, because this way, if you happen to live under the sway of the dollar in Guam, you know that you're going to get a ration of the crap that's headed our way as the dollar dies. It's not really a geopolitical empire that can be identified as a state. You can say American empire, but it really doesn't encompass it, because there's so many other factions that are also part of all of this. If you say Western, it's a little too vague for my liking. So I just say the dollar empire is dying, and as a result of which we see these all of these other manifestations that you usually see in the end times of any given empire.
When I see that we have been at war 93% of our time, 222 years out of 239. If you had to bet if we're going to war, and some people say, Mel, come on, stop saying that. Meditate your problems away. Think of love and peace. Of course I do think that. But when I see the president, I see where we're going. Take ISIL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever you call it these days. At Alternative Media, we've been talking about this for some time now, that we think this was created by the CIA, Mossad. Otherwise, you would think that ISIL would be marching towards Tel Aviv, and they don't. So other intelligence agencies, military agencies, and they're financially backing, by the USA, Saudi Arabia, and other countries in the Middle East, backed by Turkey, which has been caught buying ISIS or oil stolen from Syria and Iraq. Isn't it interesting that we don't see that until now? Russia today is the one bringing that to the forefront. You think the mainstream media or the mainstream people, are finally waking up to the fact that we are playing both sides?
No, I don't. I think it's a thing of percentages. So here's how it lays out. Again, patterns, okay? We find that there are consistent patterns within the social order that emerges of biology. So in any given social order, it doesn't really matter where you are. The range of homosexual percent is between 1.5 to 1.8, sometimes as high as 2.1. In the exceptional period of time after major wars in major World War II action in Central Europe and in the Four States War in South America that also occurred in the 30s, there were so many males killed off that the population of homosexuals rose to almost 11% of the society, but that's the highest, and that was very aberrant. But we look and we see that there's this 2% rule that's everywhere, okay? 2% of the population is going to be natively addictive or receptive to nicotine. 2% will be natively addictive to virtually any substance you can think. If you look at any given time, you've got 2% of the populace that's probably sex addicts or out-and-out alcoholics. Now, there's a corollary to this, and that's the 8% follow-on. And so, for instance, if you'll note, if you wanted to go through the United States right at the moment, you wanted to count up all of the pews in all of the churches of any kind, all the religious institutions, all the tents, anything that made any pretense to being religion, you would find that there's about enough pews to cover 2% of the populace in shifts, okay? For all the people that were to claim to be Christian and claim to go to church, if they were to actually show up, if we even took half that number and they were to actually show up, all the churches would have to run 24/7 and everybody would have to have two other people sitting in their lap. There are just not that many pews in existence. Now, there's a whole lot of big noise at the moment about a lot of people are saying, Putin is practicing a religious war against the Muslims because under his period of time, there's been 25,000 churches created in Russia. Well, we're back to the 2% level. During that period of time of the Bolsheviks et al., they burned down and destroyed all the churches,
That's
reducing
right.
the total number of pews down to far less than 2%. The 25,000 have been created in the last 10 and a half years.
They're just being rebuilt.
Correct. So it brought us back up to the 2% level. And so you can go on and on and on. So no, I don't think the general populace is going to wake up. What happens, though, is this. It's the same thing that was identified in Crossing the Chasm and any number of other business books, okay, especially about the introduction of technology. You've got the people that are visionaries that see this thing for the first time, and they use it from that point on. So I saw at Microsoft in 1992, I was in an office working with some other people, and we all saw for the first time this thing that had just popped up from CERN that was called Mozilla. It was the very first browser. So it was the very first example of HTML.
In 92?
92.
Wow.
Right. And so we were all instantly floored by HTML. And by 93, it was in widespread use among all of the people I knew as coders. And so we moved it from visionaries into early adopters. And then over time, of course, it comes down into the mainstream. Look how long, relatively short actually, it took for the mainstream populace to get really heavy into computers. And then look how long it took, relatively short again, for the mainstream populace to get into handheld computers, i.e. smartphones. So we're looking at about a 4.5 to 5 year cycle. So what we're looking at here with the press and this kind of thing is basically the 2% rule. but there's an 8% follow-on. And the best way to provide this as an example is that 2% of the people natively like to exercise, but a total of 10% of any given population will be exercising because there's 8% of the populace that will go along with that 2%. There's 8% that'll always go along with the 2%. So you'll find, for instance, in almost any cause, you'll get up to about a 2% level of local populace, and it'll kick over, and then you'll find that there's others, the 8% followers on. They don't really believe it, but they're willing to go along with it because it seems to be working for you. And there they want it to work for them. And so you reach this point where you get 10%, and once you've reached 10%, it's solidified as part of your social order, whatever it is, jogging or this kind of thing. But once you fall below a certain level of percentage of adoption, it falls away because everything goes through these cycles of time. So we're in a cycle of time when we're running into what I call secrets revealed. Now, secrets revealed in our sense was a metadata layer. So I have to stop for a second and explain that if you wanted to look at our data as though it were in a giant spreadsheet, a column would cross very many different subsets, and you may find a metadata layer would exist in a particular column if in that column every single one of the subsets represented by the rows held the same value. So for us, a metadata layer was like secrets revealed. We would find it in this subset being referenced by the data. We'd find it in another subset. All over all of our model space, we kept running to the idea that secrets would be revealed. And this was associated with long-term values. We had all different kinds of descriptors for this occurring, including things that at the time seemed wildly improbable. So let me hearken us back to old ALTA reports that talked about data dumps coming into the general populace in two specific instances, which at the time could never have been possible for us to foresee. Okay, I mean, in a rational sort of a universe, and so we're talking irrational web-botch stuff here. But in 2004 and 5, we had secrets revealed for where the Vatican would be involved in riots that would break through the supporting police structure. And the Vatican would be looted. And in the process of being looted by the rioters, which was going to be a food-related issue, the rioters would end up breaking into a library, and some people would see what was going on, and all of a sudden cell phones would be clicking, and people would be taking photos of all of this treasure trove, of all this hidden knowledge, which would come out on the internet. Another instance very similar to that was to take place somewhere in the region of Delaware. Maryland in general, okay? And it could be as low as Virginia, but in some kind of a hidden situation, rioting is again going to break out that will intrude upon and cause damage to a hidden storage facility, again with all kinds of records that will then be looted by or liberated by the rioters. And again, it'll be an instance of cell phones taking pictures and so on. Now, in 2003, 4, and 5, when these long-term data sets were shaping up and we first started talking about these instances, I had no way of knowing what the, quote, set and setting is going to be for the things popping up. But you and I can both sit here right now and imagine a near-term future where there are so many refugees in Italy concentrated in Rome that food riots break out because they're all starving. Or we could have the same kind of thing occur as a result of some other motivation in the Maryland region. And thus we now have a world moving into a situation where way back when we said, oh, look, secrets are going to be revealed in this metadata layer about this time as these various different things occur. And it's like, oops, well, we're sort of here now.
When I think of everything that's happening in the Middle East and all these refugees, the crisis, I think, we're supporting ISIS and the rebels. They're bombing cities in Syria, which is causing millions to emigrate, of course. If we weren't there in the first place, this wouldn't be happening. So are we causing the entire problem? But then when you tell an average person of this, they look at you as if you're crazy. And it's tough to live in a world where people are so brainwashed by the media. So I'm glad we have this platform to share the truth.
I agree. I'm glad as well. I mean, the last 25 years would have been terrible for both of us if we'd had to do this in isolation. But here's something too, and I'm going to get on your case here because I'm older than you and I feel I have that right. But you've got to start watching your language. You're going to get into problems talking to the sheeple if you use the we word. You say we are supporting ISIS. I am not supporting ISIS, so I'm really, really clear about that. ISIL, all of this is caused by the power cabal that's coming out of Washington, D.C., and the tool is probably first instigated through the use of the CIA.
Bad choice of semantics. Let me rephrase. When I say
there's
we.
the point. There's the point. You're talking to a linguist in here, and we've got to be very clear about this.
Parsing words, yep.
Yep, but here's the thing, too. The very first act, and I know this from personal experience, the very first thing you think about after an enlightenment experience is that the proper labeling of your experience in reality. And so you will find that the closer that you come to understanding your own consciousness and experiencing it as an enlightenment experience, the closer you will come to the point where you must, at all circumstances, even if it brings you problems, be clear about what you're experiencing to yourself. And this, of course, brings great clarity to your thinking and to your interactions with others, especially because you're specific about delineating the thoughts within the language. So I'm very careful I try diligently, and I'm certain I fail all the time, but I try very diligently to not be sloppy and inclusive when I'm truly not trying to describe such a situation. So I will say we when I mean all of us poor schlubs suffering at the hands of the power elite and the criminal Kabbalists that run the United States. But will I identify myself with them or any of their political processes or any of their outpouring of evil on the planet? No. And, my father was in the military and fought a number of wars for this country and was totally disillusioned by 1968. In the process, he was quite adamant when I got into those kind of situations of always presenting at a young age, faced with no work, going into the military potential, this kind of thing, of presenting the horror that the U.S. military truly was. Great people, evil mission. And that was basically his summation for it. Was that, some of the best people on the planet you could find in the military. And at the same time, the whole thing was so evil that he detested his participation in it. But by the time he realized it was far too late. He was a lifer, had been in, 25 years, believed the propaganda, et cetera, right? So we just have to be careful about this because it is not we that are doing these things. You can be very specific. You could say Obama if you wanted to get that level, or you could, come up with other words. But it also helps to clarify your own thinking about what you're observing. And you do not wish to identify with it.
I stand corrected, duly noted. And by the way, Saudi Arabia, and we'll start with the ALTA report momentarily, but Saudi Arabia, they have over 100,000 empty, air-conditioned tents that could house up to 3 million refugees. And these tents, about 2,100 miles from Syria, in the city of Mina, like Arkansas, are only used a few days a year to house pilgrims on their way to Mecca. And guess how many refugees they're housing? A big whopping 0. Why isn't the world demanding that Saudi Arabia, a country that shares more culturally with the refugees than any other, they're heading to? Why aren't we demanding that they, house some of them?
Well, there's the whole thing. I mean, I don't know why the world doesn't demand shit. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't tell you why the world isn't on everybody's case. If it were me, I'd be over there, in a situation, raising some hell about it because you shouldn't treat people this way. However, here's some things to recognize. The House of Saud owns Arabia. It was given to them by the Brits in 1920s. Yeah. The House of Saud is actually Jewish. They were a Jewish family of servants to the last of the Saud. When he died, they took the name and took all the possessions, and they've been outwardly facing Muslims ever since, but secretly practicing as Jews.
You're the second person in 2 days who enlightens me about this. David Livingstone told me that yesterday.
You're kidding. Oh, coincidence. Just popping up all over, guy. Yeah. But no, this is known for years and years and years. I mean, Muslims are like any other populace. 2% of their populace are alcoholics. 2% are drug addicts. In Saudi Arabia, they really don't like either. And the will of the state is just totally against this and will kill you and do terrible things to your body should they find this, even to the point of extracting blood from you as you come into their country, even if you're not a citizen, and arrest you for bringing in THC into the country in your own blood, should you have smoked a joint in within 30 days or whatever, and it was able to be tested. They can do that level of stuff. Yet, of the 3,000 princes that are at the top part of the echelon, almost all of those 3,000 princes have been seen consuming alcohol, prostitutes, and drugs in all these various Western pleasure centers, Las Vegas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's one guy I know is a fanatic about it. He's got pictures of the 3,000 fellows, and I think he's tracked like 2,370 or something last time I talked to him. He's got photos of them out being non-Muslim. And they're drug smugglers and all of this kind of thing, and they behave in many ways just as their Israeli cousins do. So it's not too much of a leap of faith to imagine the situation that led to the House of Saud being in existence, especially since we find that the same Rothschild hand was behind the Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Iraq wasn't a country prior to the Rothschilds coming on in through the Brits in the 1920s and creating the Middle East as we know it. So the world demanding action out of Saudi Arabia, I would think, is kind of useless. I'm not demanding anything out of them because they're never going to change. They have their own agenda. And we also are playing out a divide and conquer strategy. There are those at one level that are claiming that the Western powers don't want to have a unified Muslim world, and so therefore we support Shia against Shiite and the Wahhabi and their plans, et cetera, and we're trying to promote Muslim on Muslim violence.
Well, that's the point. Aren't they the ones? For example, you have just to pick one company, Norton Antivirus. They need viruses out there in order to keep surviving. Aren't they the one spreading the virus of Wahhabism or extremism by creating these schools around the Middle East that, in essence, they're brainwashing the kids to become terrorists and therefore keep the war machine going? Correct.
And the Saudis have plenty of reason for this. Because of their very tenuous situation within their own region and their own country. So their power base is very, very, very broad. Let's put it this way. Their power pyramid is top-heavy. It's not a totally unbalanced one, but it's very top-heavy. And so it comes down in a pyramid shape and then gets to, like the broken pyramid in Egypt, goes to kind of sort of shoulders that go on down. And from the shoulders on down in their power pyramid are all foreign workers, most of whom are Muslim, many of whom are trained by the Wahhabis, but many of whom are anti-Wahhabi because of where they happen to come from. So Saudi imported a lot of their own problems. And their power pyramid is such that from the shoulders on down, everybody is working their butts off to support the very heavy top of the pyramid, which is these 3,000 princes and all of their families and all their business occupations and so on. And it's a very totalitarian state where if the Saudi family doesn't like you, you don't get work. And they are that vindictive that they go down and hassle people that used to be maids and, say something wrong about them. And thereafter that maid can't find work and her life or his life is just hell. So it's not doesn't have a whole lot of popular support by the people that are actually living in country, many of whom are now in their second and third generation, in spite of the fact that the Sauds try and kick everybody out at least once a generation and then have them come back in so that they don't have any idea or of permanency. They've now got a situation where they have second and third generation servants that are starting to feel like native Saudis, yet they have no rights, they don't have citizenship, and so on. And so the 3,000 princes in their very top-heavy pyramid, they continue to keep growing at the top while the base of the pyramid keeps shrinking, and it's going to fall over. Now they've also done something really stupid, which was to attack Yemen, which is kind of like the Brits' decision to try and take Khartoum and hold it against the Somalis. Now made famous by Rudyard Kipling's poem about the fuzzy wuzzy because of the Somalis' hair. But the Somalis took on the greatest empire on the planet, armed only with sticks, stones, and spears. They beat that army, the British army, to a standstill, and then drove them back in horrific defeat. Like the only other people that have done that have been the Afghanis. So it's kind of a situation where attacking the Yemeni is the same, going to result in the same problems for Saudi Arabia that was coincident with the British Empire attacking the Somalis, because it represents at a larger pattern kind of a position. That was the nexus, the nadir, the peak, the zenith, the pinnacle of the British pound power was at that period of time when it was engaged in all these wars and the opium trade, etc. And we find that the pinnacle of Saudi power is also at this point now going to be peaked out against their involvement in this terrible foreign war with the Yemenis, who, like the Somalis, cannot be defeated at all, ever. I mean, these are people you just don't want to mess with. So the poor Sauds, I knew the minute that they did that, the minute that they crossed the border into Yemen, that was the end of their organization. So I don't expect Saudi Arabia to exist 5 years from now as we understand it. I don't even think it'll be a contiguous country even then. And of course, there's going to be major repercussions from this, because once the Saudi family goes, there goes the support for all the Wahhabist schools all throughout Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kashmir, all around the planet, because that money supply is it's already going. I mean, they're already suffering now. I'm getting reports out of Pakistan that a lot of the Wahhabist schools are having to resort to local begging because their Saudi masters don't have the money to send to them anymore because of the oil issues.
Well, I hope the Wahhabist virus dies soon, but it's interesting that Saudi Arabia is the only country name in the Middle East associated with a family name, and Saudi means belongs to Saud. So unless you're not a part of the monarchy, you're in essence a slave of the House of Saud.
Correct. Yeah, and if you're not part of them, you do not exist. You're merely, a tool.
Now, Terra, let's begin with Terra, and then we'll have to take a one and only break. And we have so much to discuss. But Terra, what do you see for Terra in 2016 and beyond?
Hang on a second. Let's back up for just a second. Continue with this thought for just a bit here,
sure.
Okay? And that is that if we look at the issues that are going on with the destruction of the empires and all of this kind of stuff, and go all the way back to that Economist cover, you see on that Economist cover a mushroom cloud, and thus the potential for nuclear war, et cetera, right? Well, a very curious thing has happened here recently that, even though it is small, should not be overlooked. And that is that the federal government gave a particular person explicit permission to publish a theory that he has enough evidence in my mind to have proven. So I think his theory is proven by the evidence that he's presented. And this is a fellow that anybody can go find on YouTube. And he was speaking, I'm sorry, I don't know his name. I'll dig it up and pass it on. But he was speaking at this last Secret Space Program conference in 2015 at some place in Texas. It's on YouTube, Secret Space Program. And I think it was called Death on Mars or Death of Mars. And this is very apropos to us, because here's this guy's theory. His theory is that Mars was destroyed, that they had a civilization that we can see from remnants coming through the photos that they're not able to hide, a lot of icons and symbols that show us a civilization that in many ways resembled the Mayans. And that the civilization on Mars, some time ago in the past, he says 250 million years, and I dispute that based on the solar change and the degradation of radioactive isotopes, but that's neither here nor there. But his theory is that it was destroyed by hydrogen bombs that were detonated at very specific spots, airburst, intended to cause the largest possible damage to all living beings, and as a subsequent side effect, caused nuclear winter to settle over Mars, leaving it the frozen hulk that we see now. So now, here's the interesting parts. You can go and see his proof, which is all about the xenon isotope ratios, and the guy's absolutely correct about all of this. But what's interesting is that the government told him to go and talk to people, let people know. And so here we are now facing the potential for nuclear war, and which will lead to nuclear winter. And the people behind the throne, maybe even behind the Rothschilds, have finally gotten it off their butts to the point where they're saying, we're coming up to that same precipice again. We've got to start bringing this out now. Only we've already used the nuclear winter card before, and it worked. Carl Sagan, all of those people, it brought us down from the Cold War heights of insanity with H-bombs and so on. But now that meme is worn off, so they need something new. So what better than absolute proof that this path yields this result? Okay, the destruction of a whole planet and the society and everything. But here's the real killer on this. This is the thought kicker that I find just absolutely fascinating. If we postulate that this guy is correct, that not only he's correct about the xenon isotope, he's correct about the hydrogen bombs being used to destroy Mars, he's correct about nuclear winter. Now, if we postulate that he's also correct about that social order that existed that was so destroyed by these hydrogen bombs, and then let's forget about the why, but let's ask ourselves, who would have done it? Who could have brought in hydrogen bombs to destroy a planet when the planet was at a social order that we think of as the Mayans? So now let's look at our own Mayan people and their many images of coming to Earth in spaceships that are all throughout their very extensive symbology and all their writings and all their intense carvings and drawings. And we have this definite Mars to Earth link. Now, it may have been that social order, in spite of its symbols and what we think of as primitive nature of pyramids and so on, was highly sophisticated. But it could be that it was also not.
Let me just say this, speaking of these detonations that you're talking about, what about the degradation of radioactive isotopes in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? They're thriving cities 70 years later. And what about New Mexico, the detonations there?
These were not, but these were not hydrogen bombs, okay? There's a big difference between the two types, and even within hydrogen bombs, there's a big difference between the two types of hydrogen bomb explosions. Because, see, here's the thing. A hydrogen bomb can be thought of, and this is just a little mental construct for us. It can be thought of as setting off a nuclear bomb, letting the explosion go out quite a ways, and then introducing more fuel into the explosion in the form of this radioactive hydrogen isotope. Okay? So basically what's going on in that thinking would be like a bariatric bomb where you put all the fuel in the air and then you shoot something in to explode it. And so you are involving nature within the process the way that the atomic bomb does not. So for instance, when these things were detonated on Mars, there was a concussion blast followed by an implosion, followed by another concussion blast. And so you might literally have had a situation where if there had been, say, a 4-story building, it would have been vaporized and turned into dust and blown 500 miles away by the initial concussion blast, and then most of it sucked back and deposited as dust before the next concussion blast came out that really wiped things out. So we're talking an order of magnitude that is beyond anything in the atomic range. Once you start talking about hydrogen bombs, you're talking actually about a different mechanism of destruction. And let's also be quite clear here. The airborne detonation with the intent to destroy as much area as possible. You'll see from his charts and stuff that this particular kind of green glass that we see in these deserts up there was caused by this explosion. And it was done in such a way as to maximize the damage that way. That also totally, these two explosions alone had enough energy in them to probably do away with a third of the atmosphere, not only in the destruction of oxygen, but literally blowing the stuff out into space as a result of the overall concussion waves, right? Because they move in spheres. So the same stuff that's moving things 1,000 miles away because of the explosion is moving part of the atmosphere 1,000 miles higher, and a lot of it doesn't come back. So the effect was truly planetary and horrific. Now, in the on Earth, we even find examples of those same things, though, and so we've got to be really clear about this. The same kind of green glass that we see in Mars is also here on Earth in several different deserts.
The Sinai Peninsula is one of them.
Correct. And we also see it in what we think of as the Sudan and Greater Egypt, and it's in Mongolia. It's in a lot of the desert areas. The one place we don't see it with large deserts is in the Americas. And that may be because the Americas as continents were not involved, not populated at the time of the wars that went on that created the green glass here on our planet. If we postulate that they were approximately the same age as the one on Mars, then we can come to an even further conclusion, which is real speculation. And that would be that there was some kind of an interplanetary sort of thing going on, warfare, that resulted in the destruction of what was known as the fifth planet, or Marduk, which we now see as the debris field of the
asteroid belt.
Correct, the asteroid belt. There's also another aspect of that, and that is that if we look at Jain cosmology, Jain is perhaps the oldest religion on the planet, the oldest continuous record-keeping group on the planet is what we know of as the Jain religion. We call them Jain because most of the people involved in the core of the religion have that as a part of their name taken from their religion. But there's something very unique about that in that they have a cosmology that is different than all the other cosmologies of all other religions or people on the planet. And their cosmology, their creation myth, if you will, goes back so far that it references humans of different colors on 2.5 islands of life here in our solar system. Now, many people today take that 2.5 islands reference to mean Mars, Earth, and the Moon, as I did originally. I fell into that camp initially. Now I'm not so sure. Now I think the 2.5 islands of life are Mars and Marduk, and Earth is the half island of life, because we were newly populated at the time that the wars broke out that destroyed Mars and totally devastated the planet Marduk. Now, here's one other aspect of this that we have to consider. That there's a potential for speculation that all the stuff I've just said is all BS in terms of the Marduk stuff, the destruction of the planet came about some other way, not involved, et cetera, because there is one possibility that we must consider, that some peaceful humanoids, more or less peaceful, spacefaring, single planet isolated humans were wiped out deliberately by some non-human species. For the express purpose of wiping them out. And so some advanced civilization came here from some other place and found humans on Mars and decided, and exterminated them. And that may well be the case.
Now, before we take the break, what I meant to say, and I'm not disputing what you're saying, that's probably Dr. John Brandenburg, who you're referring to from the Secret Space Program.
Yes.
You know, when I think of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, how is it that people live there today and there's absolutely no proof, apps whatsoever, of any data, actually, subsequent cancer deaths attributable to radiation? And then I think of the detonations in New Mexico, where you see all those props, miniature props being used. And I wonder, are nuclear weapons just a hoax and it's simply fear?
No.
Even used as a weapon?
No, because we know that this is not the case, that these are quite real and horrific, because the explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed vast quantities of people. But we also find that the radiation issues you're talking about in both of those cases are ameliorated by the people that were attacked. The Japanese have a very high alkaline diet. They eat all kinds of foods natively that are radiation removing, that are toxic removal. And we find that the American peoples do not, as a rule, ingest these substances. And therefore, those American peoples in the populace of the Southwest, my generation especially, that were kids at the time of all the nuclear tests, suffered horrifically with thyroid cancers, pituitary cancers, all kinds of cancers here in the United States, except those people that were Japanese and happened to have a more traditional Japanese diet that included, among other things, natto and exactly, and miso and some of these fermented reactive foods. So if you happen to be Japanese and you were my age and you were born in the Southwest and you ate from traditional Japanese foods, you were probably protected against the same kind of radiation that killed several cousins of mine that lived in that area.
But if you were to go there right now with a radiation, detector, mechanism or device, wouldn't you be able to detect that there's plenty of radiation there because it degrades in thousands or millions of years?
No, see, there's sort of the fallacy about this, right? I've gotten really into the radiation detection as a result of the Fukushima thing. And I've got some very highly accurate, calibrated radiation meters here that are at the top end of the line with the paddles and the whole deal. And they're great for sampling foods and that kind of thing. But to go and do an ambient radiation study, just waving the thing around in the air as you walk around in the desert, you're not going to find anything necessarily that's going to be stronger than the background radiation. The reason for this is that even in deserts, you're going to get the permutation of the heavier radioactive isotopes further and further and deeper into the soil. So really, if you want to look for it, you got to go and dig. Okay, so even in these few years of only 60 some odd years since the nuclear test, even now you don't find a lot of the stuff on the surface, and you have to go down into deeper layers of the sand because of deposits, there are infrequent rains even, and so on. Up here in the Northwest, we've got a very nice situation at the moment that no matter how much radiation is blowing in from Fukushima, as long as we get our rains, we're sort of protected because our ground is so porous. It's so filled with clay and various different kinds of glacial fill rocks. And it's designed with all the trees and the roots and everything to just wick away all of the water because we get so much of it that it takes the radiation out of the air, puts it into the ground, and drives it further and further and deeper into the soil. I would not, for instance, eat mushrooms for another 5 years that are locally harvested in our forests because the mushrooms have a tendency to concentrate the radiation, as we saw from Chernobyl, and even years later they're still concentrating it at significantly nasty levels. But other than that, we're not seeing a whole lot of the effects in the environment because it's getting washed down into deep layers of the soil.
Well, now let's take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to dive into ALTA. A lot of people are asking about the markets, where are we going to be next year as it relates to the dollar? We just heard, contrary to all the experts who said that China's Yuan was not going to become a reserve currency, well, contrary to what they believed, it just happened. And I want to know what's going to happen next year. The global pop, the USA, Europe, China, and even let me add Japan to that, and so much more. Even space goat farts. When we come back, Clif, how can people buy the report and all the previous ones?
You can just go to halfpasthuman.com. There's right at the very top, there's a link to how to buy the latest report, and it's all on one big page that goes back years and years and years. So if you want to go way back, you can buy all of the older ones.
Excellent. Folks, don't go anywhere. I'm delighted to have my friend Clif High. Again, another season premiere. Can't believe this is season 8.
Yeah, it's scary. You're getting old.
This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to Veritas. Much more when we return. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for listening to the first segment of this very important Veritas interview. If you enjoyed it and wish to listen to the rest, go to veritasradio.com, click on members or subscribe, or tell someone else who will enjoy this and all our radio programs. If you are listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share it. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store, where you can purchase pure organic sulfur, earthing and grounding products, supplements, a USB drive with all our shows, gift certificates, rebounders, fulvic acid, full body vibration machines, and much more. Now, we'll take a short intermission, listen to some music, and I'll see you in the Veritas member section. Enjoy.
It's a beautiful world. I like swimming in the sea. I like to go out beyond the white breakers, where a man can still be free, or a woman if you are one. I like swimming in the sea. Oh my, 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 it's a beautiful world. I like drinking Irish tea with a little bit of lapsang souchong. I like making my own tea. Oh my, 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 it's a beautiful world. I like driving in my car. I roll the top down. Sometimes I travel quite far and drive to the ocean and stare up at the stars. I like driving in my car. All around is anger and automatic guns. There's death in large numbers, no respect for women or our little ones. I tried talking to Jesus, but he just put me on hold. Said he'd been swamped by calls this week. He could not shake his cold. And still this emptiness persists. Perhaps this is as good as it gets. You've given up the drink and those nasty cigarettes. Now leave the party early, at least with no regrets. I watch the sun as it comes up, I watch it as it sets. Yeah, this is as good as it gets. So my, it's a beautiful world. I like swimming in the sea. I like to go out beyond the white breakers, where a man can still be free, or a woman if you are one. I like swimming in the sea.
And welcome back to Veritas. I'm here with Clif from halfpasthuman.com, welcoming Season 8 of Veritas. Can't believe it's been 8 years. So many people laughed at us at the beginning saying, you don't have a prayer of a chance. Even consultants I spoke with, Clif, said you don't have a prayer of a chance to stay on the air more than 3 months. So where are they now? Anyways, I'm glad to have you here.
Well, there's something too. There's an old saying in my line of work as a software developer: the number of people that, as the number of people decrying you rises, the odds are you being right also rises.
Now, let's go talk about Terra for a moment. The first thing I think when I think of Terra, the storms. We haven't seen a big one for a while. Florida, nearing 10 years with no hurricanes. But I have to ask you of this, speaking of hurricanes, what is your opinion on the most powerful hurricane ever, Hurricane Patricia, that recently made landfall in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, Category 5, which is the highest at 200 miles per hour winds, and the National Hurricane Center was even considering creating a new category, Category 6. Yet, even people I know in Puerto Vallarta, right on the coast, only saw rain, no wind. Was this a psyop, and what was depicted on radar? Was it real?
I don't know that we could say psyop per se. I mean, yeah, someone might have used it that way, but I thought of it as a science experiment. I knew that someone was out monkeying about with forces and that this was never going to be a particular problem just because of the way that was being steered and the way it came up, just atypical to the patterns you would usually see in cyclones in the Pacific. The rise of the strength of it was just phenomenal. It was as though it was being pumped up. So once I saw that, it was like, oh, maybe they'll just let it go. And indeed they did. It just sort of puffed right out. But in the meantime, it was there on radar. It was quite fierce. So let me give you another sort of an example here, okay? I think it was like maybe 1909 or thereabouts, there was a period of time where the Italian government was complaining that the radio experimenters that were lining the Italian coast, the reason that they were on the coast had to do with the kind of rock that was there and the facilities that they had there, probably also because it was clement weather and they could work in outside frequently. But the radio experimenters there were causing storm problems for the Italians. It was a year of exceptional storms. This was in the lead up to the Marconi patents and versus the Tesla, and then the development of radar and all of that kind of stuff. For whatever reason, the western coast of Italy was just a hotbed of this activity, and there was a coincident rise in storms. And there was even there are even a few threads that you can find occasionally in older books that are occasionally being digitized and put online, where there's a discussion that was held at the time, and I think it was, like I say, maybe it was late as the 1920s. I don't think it was after the war. I think it was actually pre-World War I. But in any event, there was discussion among some of the radio people as could they steer storms, because they knew they were actually pumping power into them, because this one fellow had said, well, look, he can take his radio frequencies here and do this to them with his tubes and cause this reaction in the local clouds. And so I think that kind of thing has been continuing, that the idea of operating invisible forces is really going to be a big deal in 2016, as we see from this latest report, that people are going to be encountering these invisible forces more and more. And some of them are not quite as obvious, in the sense of we're not looking for them in the middle of a hurricane. And then when the forces are withdrawn, the hurricane just sort of goes and sighs away. But I think we'll see more and more examples of this over 2016. Now, one of the reasons we may see it has to do with the breakaway civilization and the fact that Earth is in a sololuneous period. We're getting bombarded with all kinds of radiation from space. It's causing humans to be just jittery and itchy and raspy and mean as hell. And so we're going to see a lot of antagonism and this kind of thing going on. And the invisible forces portion of it may be, if we really wanted to speculate, may be things that we'll see in the first global police force, which is what the Rothschilds are trying to engineer for the 2020s. The one world government idea, sort of. Basically, it's a pan-national technocratic power force, if you will, not necessarily armies per se. What need is there of an army if you can twist some dials on a machine and cause a magnetic ball the size of the Eiffel Tower to roll around and crush buildings thousands of miles away? And so that's the kind of thing that we're getting into. Whether it's space alien warfare, as the Space Goat Farts entity would suggest, or just humans mucking about, I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff within the data for, if you will, exposure, not disclosure, but exposure of this kind of thing in 2016 and beyond. And I think seeing it in early days with Patricia.
And by the way, I don't doubt that we have the capability of steering hurricanes, but I was right in the middle of Hurricane Andrew's path in South Florida in 1992. And when I lived in the Caribbean, I went through many hurricanes. And Andrew was a bit small. It was Category 5, but it was smaller than Patricia. And I have a hard time believing this hurricane was even real when people I know who live on the coast of the path didn't even evacuate. And they told me, Mel, just a little bit of rain and no wind at all.
I know of some people that sailed near the event.
Sailed?
They were out sailing. Okay, they just happened to be out sailing off of. They had actually left from Ecuador, and they were going to go up to Mexico and then sail over to Hawaii. And so this was just coincident. They were trailing sort of behind it. They were aware that there was an extreme low pressure zone because the barometer and the instruments told them that. But even they did not see much while out at sea. So the guy I was talking to there, or communicating by email, said that really that he had seen the dark clouds, but he said it didn't look like a hurricane to him.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what do you really see behind the climate change meetings currently taking place? What is truly their agenda?
It's speculation. It goes to their intent, and you can say that, well, their intent is to get the hell off of Earth because of the developing instability that's showing up in the planet, and that this is just one of the mechanisms that they're going to use to steering us all into being their slaves, to provide them with a technocratic society capable of providing the devices that will get them all off the planet and to presume safety elsewhere. Ultimately, the Agenda 21 and the climate control stuff is not as it's being proffered. I'm of the opinion that it doesn't make sense. So I'm of the opinion that the Georgia Guidestones are not as they may seem on their obvious face. In other words, I don't think that any of the stuff there is necessarily a goal of the New World Order. I don't think that the New World Order wants to reduce the population of the planet. I think they need all of us and more. In fact, they're going to have to work very hard to stabilize our population, humanity as a species against the upcoming ice age and the problems we're going to face, and that they need all of us in order to supply the base to the pyramid with them at the top that will get them off of what they see as an increasingly unstable platform for a long-term environment.
But I think they want us diluted. For example, what's happening in Europe. If you take France, for example, their birth rate continues to go down, and all the immigrants who are coming in are surpassing, and probably in 50 years, the original French will be the minority.
No, that won't happen. The reason that won't happen has to do, I mean, it would seem logical on the face of it, but in the years of doing forecasting business, the very first idea that comes to mind, like with most good authors, throw it out. It's too common and too obvious and won't manifest that way because universe likes its surprises. So, for instance, many years ago, Reconquista was intended to be the plan for all of the southwest of the U.S. Yet now, as forecast in the webbots years and years and years ago, the mass of migration has turned south.
You mean Aslan?
Correct. They're fleeing like mad. There's been a net negative migration of Hispanic peoples into the U.S. this year,
right.
And next year it will be an absolute flood as they leave. And we will see a drying up of that whole idea of Azatlan and Reconquista north of the
especially
of the
Trump
Rio
wins.
Grande.
Especially Trump wins.
No, won't matter. Actually, I don't think either Trump or Hillary will win. There's going to be a fracturing of the political process next year.
And we'll discuss
other unrelated issues.
We'll discuss that fracturing. I'm very curious. You talk a lot about that. By the way, you mentioned Agenda 21. Have you heard about Agenda 2030? Yes,
I have. Yes.
What do you think? What do you say about that?
Okay, here's the problem with all of this stuff, as is going to be my new motto. We live in the information age, therefore we cannot know anything to be true or factual. There's just too much information, right? So I'm on the face of it, there's much in the Agenda 21 stuff that would make sense from a New World Order perspective, but if you think about it a little bit, there's also a whole lot in there that does not. It comes to the idea of, really comes down to their goals of the Rothschilds or the boss, okay? Mr. Global, according to Catherine Austin Fitts. But if the boss wants to do something, they're not necessarily going to, they may be using certain forms of like reverse psychology and disinformation in order to get herd effects going that they then later, once the herd is moving, then they turn it. So I know of a dog that herded when I was a kid, and we visited some relatives in Missouri, and they had this dog that herded anything you wanted, pigs, chickens, didn't matter. He was like a shepherd kind of a dog, a little bit nondescript. Anyway, though, he would get him moving, and then he would look to my great uncle, George Walker, for the direction that George wanted him to go to. It didn't matter to the dog which direction he had them started in, because once they were moving as a herd, it was very easy to turn. It was that initial overcoming of inertia that was the effort. So frequently, you would see that the dog would try and herd them back towards us in a corral, even though they ended up having to go to the far side of the corral ultimately. And that's what I think is going on, that there are certain things that are being used to motivate and kick up the non-10%, the 90% of the populace. The 75% of the populace will never, ever get it. On top of that, we've got about another 15% that's going to be sort of not quite sheeple, not quite aware. And then you have the 10% that's aware and awake. Now, the 10% that's aware and awake, once they get the idea and get moving, the other 15% that's sort of there will start latching onto it. And then suddenly, at some point, the whole herd moves, and then the rest of the 75% adopts the program and gets with the whole with the rest of the group. What's required is a 10% that is absolutely committed to their proposition, whether or not it is successful in the long run. So in other words, if you've got a Stoic that's within that 10%, they're going to just keep going whether it kills them or not, because the goal is worthwhile, even at the expense of their own life. Once you have that level of dedication, then you can get the whole social order to shift as individuals. So you and I could change the social order, and in fact are doing so as we speak. But the boss, he can't work that way. The boss has to have his herd animals start to move the herd, and then he decides then he tells them which way he wants them to go. So just because they're coming up with all the climate stuff now, global warming and all of this kind of stuff now, does not mean we won't fade back into Ice Age, because those people who did not live through it are unaware of the big Ice Age scare in the 60s and the early 70s. That was the climate thing we were all afraid of. And it's because of the oscillation that indeed Ice Age is in our future, if we're lucky. If we don't go to Ice Age, we end up with the theoretical Venus hothouse effect, and all of life dies. If in fact we get this oscillation between heat, cold, heat, cold, heat, cold, goes to super hot, and then it goes to cold and it doesn't warm up again, then the oceans can recover. They'll absorb all the excess gas. We'll have a nasty Ice Age. Humans will scurry around running from glaciers for a few hundred years, 1,000 years or whatever, but then we'll come back to a stable planet. There's issues there with the expansion and so on. But basically, in order to achieve this, whatever their goal is, the boss puts things out that are basically their herd animals. And that's what I think a lot of this literature is, along with the idea of, Agenda 21 et al.
Interesting how you pronounce Missouri as a local from the state. Now, ice cores, cycles. If we go with ice cores, couldn't we determine if life on Earth is about cycles, and they are at a certain interval, they repeat again and again? Couldn't we just determine where we're heading?
That would be true if you didn't have things like the expansion of the planet. So if the planet were always the size it is now, I would agree with you, but that's not the case. All planets grow. And so thus the ice cores have to be analyzed within the idea that, oh, look, the planet gained, 2.5% of surface area this year. So, and I'm just hypothesizing sometime in the past, that we expanded. England broke off in a big rupture from the continent, and we had the first fissure that created the separation of North and South America, and that all happened in the same year. In that year, we gained approximately 1 point some odd percent of surface area. In that year, we had a major cooling episode. Why is this? Well, because there's more surface area to deal with the effects that are going on. A lot of this surface area is sub-ocean, and thus not affected by the heat sink of radiation from the sun issue. So as the planet expands, it expands slightly faster than the radiation component of the sun. And this is necessarily so if one follows the little bloop model of reality. Because in that model, what happens is that all planets have a reactive plasma core that is tightly packed energy that's surrounded by matter. And in come zinging high energy particles from the sun and other extraplanetary sources. These get trapped in the plasma. They help create matter. Matter has to go somewhere. It goes on the outside of the plasma and gets shoved into the other matter that's already there. The other matter has to separate in part to accommodate the new matter, and we get the expansion of the planet over time. As it is doing so, it is necessarily sucking in these high-energy particles, and they don't go anywhere else. They don't go through the planet. They just get caught in the plasma core. As a result of this, the energy relationship of the Earth to the sun and the energy relationship on the surface of the Earth also changes. So we end up going from hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold into a cold period as the Earth reaches one of these major expansion points, which is what we're heading for now. So we'll tip into an ice age, I'm pretty sure, and maybe even fairly rapidly.
And according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, he says Earth is not only oblate. It's wider at the equator than pole to pole, but pear-shaped, slightly wider just south of the equator. I'd love to see a single picture of our planet that is not taken from space, that is not CGI, but we'll leave that for the end of the interview. But going back to nature here, just today, Nicaragua's Momotombo has erupted, a volcano, for the first time in 100 years. More to come. And have you found a correlation between earthquakes, volcano eruptions, and hurricanes, and solar maximums and minimums?
People postulate that there is indeed a connection to the solar maximum and minimums, but I don't believe that's the case because those are not measured on the radiation that makes the planet expand. So the effect is coincidental within our lifetimes and may not span beyond that. Make sense? The solar minimum and maximums are not really what the sun is all about. Even in a solar minimum, we're likely to be hit with higher levels of high energy particles in some solar minimums than in others. And same thing with some solar maximums, which are going to cause the expansion effects within the planets independent of those presumed solar cycles. So I think there's a longer cycle that's operating. And the closest one I can find is the 100,000 year. It's nearly 100,000 years. It's like 97,000 some odd years in Ice Age formation, and we're judging the Ice Age by a particular kind of ice that's created that a glacier forms over. So this nascent glacier, seed glacier kind of stuff occurs with regularity every 97,000 years up to 104,000 years, bang, 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 back as far as we can go. And that is independent of, because of the type of ice, because of the structure of ice within the core. It doesn't matter what it contains. It doesn't matter about radioactive isotopes or any of that. Actually has to do with the way in which the crystal forms. Because of that, we know that there is about 100,000 year cycle involving ice ages. And I think that 100,000 year cycle is what keeps our planet healthy.
And when it comes to global pop, the new report mentions new molds. What are these, and what are the implications for humanity and industries?
Here's the scary part of this. There's huge amounts of cross-links between that section, anything within any of the subsets of global pop, and space goat farts relating to the molds. Okay, within the space goat farts part of the process, these molds are looked at and are linguistically identified as space alien weapons. So we're talking about molds that are described in global pop as causing health issues. Somehow being transmitted on hair. So like a woman in India cuts her hair and it's somehow processed with lots of other hair, and it gets contaminated and ends up being sold into the wig market. And then someone wears that wig in New Brunswick and ends up with skin problems it's not a skin cancer being described. It's actually a mold attack, a fungus attack. Now, the thing about the molds is being described here is there's very little actual language going to the idea of a fungus per se. It's much more a lot of the language related to things like slime molds, which don't really manifest as a fungus does with mycelia, etc. So I think we're dealing with something that's a little bit atypical and not really seen much so far. We're going to have respiratory problems, all of these kind of things, going to be associations with chemtrails in the molds, increased moisture levels in the molds. But what's also curious was that we see that the mold issues are even going to affect areas that are normally considered to be really dry, like the deserts. So there's going to be some other vehicle, so to speak, some other transmission mechanism. And I think it's commercial, because we see so much data going to the idea of contaminated ingredients, both within the cosmetic industry, the wigs, and within the food industries relative to molds, literally bursting out totally unexpected. I mean, between one processing and another, there was nothing to indicate we'd run into this mold language. And this is not like we've seen with Ebola and some of these other disease scares where the powers that be manufactured it all, because that took months to get involved, and we would see that creeping up. This was just very sudden, as though perhaps a, quote, natural outbreak. On the other hand, the space goat farts would say that there's something up in our upper atmosphere that's releasing the molds down here to soften us up for the invasion.
Well, I'm in the desert, and yes, there's no mold, but all you have to do is just drop a little bit of water on the wall, and mold just grows so quickly. But by the way, to what do you attribute the continued drop in oil prices, even when there's a lot of turmoil in the Middle East? Lower demand due to China's economic slowdown, maybe?
Yeah, there's a lot of contributing factors. China isn't sucking as much oil. We've had some reasonably major oil discoveries. Plus, we did this really stupid thing, and we lowered bond rates down at the very end of a secular bond market, the 30-year period. And we had all this free money, and so they created this industry called fracking that brought up all of this oil that we should have just left alone. And as a result of which put even further pressure on the diminishing oil market, at the same time that we're seeing a rise in end use of alternative energy. Okay, so by end use, I mean there are people that are now charging cars electrically that in the past would have been buying fuel oils to run their cars. We see people on electric bikes, electric scooters. There have been demographic changes around a number of social orders with the millennials not driving, cars being considered an anathema in a lot of different countries now. And people moving into cities where they walk or they use these little electric scooters to get around. So we're seeing a shift in primary fuel usage more towards electricity, just at the same time that we're getting out of the fossil fuels to create electricity business with a lot of successful photovoltaic improvements and windmill improvements.
So lower demand.
Correct, and it's at the same time as lower demand. So it's a conjunction of all these factors. Plus, oil is abiotic, and we're just awash with the stuff. As part of the expansion process of the planet, we can expect to get huge new amounts of materials, oils, actually of all kinds, heavy, crude, light, sweet, all of it. And as well as new finds of gold, which we're seeing the Chinese have just discovered a huge gold reserve off of a particular island at the bottom of the South China Sea. And see, a lot of these things we'll see at the bottom of the ocean. As the Earth expands, that's the thinnest part of the mantle. That's where we'll see all of the new materials come on in, and that's the way it's always been. As the planet shifts around, for instance, what had been the bottom of the ocean ends up at the top of the Himalayas over time, and those materials are being brought up. Humans now, at least some humans, are smart enough to know, oh, hey, if I want to go find something that's in short supply, I can probably find it on the bottom of the ocean because A, people haven't dug it out of there, but also because the planet's creating more of it. And so one of the things that I found really cool was in the data sets, we got a forecast for the discovery of the first tin mine or tin reserve in thousands of years. I'm talking a major tin discovery to the point where tin will be reintroduced into the industrial complex just at the time we need all these metals to take the place of silver, because the data sets within the markets are saying that as the paper currencies grind themselves down away from each other and destroy themselves, all reverting to their zero state of no value, we're going to get into a sound money planet, and as a result of which people are going to need silver as settlement vehicles for day-to-day kind of operations. Yeah, there's still going to be credit cards and liquidity provided by the credit system, but at its base will be silver instead of, quote, dollars or digital dollars, that kind of thing. And so silver is going to become too precious to use industrially. And so lo and behold, we're going to get, we've had new discoveries in copper that were forecast by the WebBot some time back that are now allowing copper to be used in lieu of silver in solar panels with actually higher levels of efficiency. These have been announced recently. They may not be online in the solar industry for a number of years, but as part of this renaissance in basically an invention wave that's going to sweep through the planet and magnify and compound on each other. And we're seeing this stuff manifest right now. It's good for silver value, even though we're going to not use it industrially. There's going to be so many people that are going to need it for day-to-day settlement of their activities that it'll become basically the money of the planet, with gold and Bitcoin being used to settle higher, larger amounts.
Whenever I hear people say that oil is dinosaur remnants, I just cringe. But, people around the world keep asking, about these weather patterns, rain where it didn't rain before, droughts where there, we used to have a lot of lakes, strange clouds. What is the culprit here?
Planetary expansion. Anybody that says global warming, you tell them, okay, I got one question for you. Who's driving the SUVs on Mars? Who's driving the SUVs on any planet you care to name? They're all going through this process. All planets expand. It's the planetary expansion. During the expansion of the planet, you get strange effects. 5,115 years ago, we suddenly created new glaciers in what had been a tropical part of the Andes. Okay, way the hell up in the Andes, 10,000 feet in the Andes and higher was tropical. And then all of a sudden, 5,115 years ago, new glaciers formed there, simultaneously forming at the same time in an area of Europe not known for snow that we now know as Switzerland. At that time, Switzerland was a lush forested area that did not know snow. It was not really snowbound at all. And yet all of a sudden we get glaciers forming in these two areas. And that was relative to an expansion period. And so it's coinciding with that. it seems outrageous that the Earth expands, but it's if you take it out of a theory and look for evidence for it, you find evidence for it everywhere. And so, if one were to want to try and reconcile all of the bizarreness for weather and climate patterns, one way to do that is to say that, yeah, there are people out there mucking about with HAARP and shoving energy around with CERN and doing all kinds of strange things to the planet. But the planet itself is a reactive vehicle underneath our feet that is growing. And that growth process itself, whether it's in the planet or in us, is always a period of instability and change. And, when you hit puberty, boy, we get unstable, right? And so maybe our planet is sort of hitting a little burst of puberty, so to speak, climate-wise, and we're getting a bit of an instability. And it may be 200 years, but it'll eventually settle down. At the moment, though, we have to live through it.
Now, against most experts' opinions, you probably heard this through the years, that, the Chinese yuan will be a reserve currency. They kept saying that's not going to happen. The renminbi has just been announced by the IMF as a reserve currency. What effect will this have on the U.S. dollar and other currencies like the euro, Canadian, and Australian dollars?
Okay, well, hang on a second. It has not been announced as a reserve currency. What's been announced is that this time next year, in December of 2016, they will open up to the idea of 10.8% of the basket being put into
one of the basket currencies. That's what I meant.
Correct. Now, see, here's the thing. It may not be meaningful by the time we get to December of next year. Okay, a lot of stuff is going to happen in between the now and then, and so it may be a question of really who cares about the IMF. The IMF is a creature of the United States Federal Reserve and the Congress.
Rothschilds.
Correct. It's a Rothschild bank. It's intended to take over when the Fed dies. That's its only purpose, is to act as inter-sovereign state and large corporation settlement vehicle for large projects once the dollar dies, because they're talking about a basket. These SDRs, the special drawing rights, is yet another form of fiat currency, paper nothing, that they want countries to assume have value and use as settlement between them. But it's not like you and I are going to spend SDRs. So no, the yuan will not be a reserve currency the way that the dollar was. When at the height of the dollar's reserve currency status before Nixon took us off the gold period, I actually lived through this, okay? I was in Europe when the French changed on a 5-for-1 old franc for new franc, and I lived through a lot of currency problems in Europe. And throughout that entire time, the dollar was a reserve currency such that I didn't care what country I was in. I could spend the dollar or buy their local currencies as suited me at the time. But no matter where I went around the planet as a kid, I could take a dollar out of my pocket and spend it locally. And that's what a reserve currency is. You're not going to see that with the yuan or the renminbi. Perhaps not for 20 years. The Chinese don't have enough base money in circulation for that to be the case. That's why they chose the 10.8% value. Also, they chose that amount to give what they hoped is going to be a quasi-equal footing for the dollar to try and stay in as a functioning currency.
10% to peg with the dollar.
Correct. And so, and they're hoping that the Chinese will change the internal peg to the U.S. dollar before this occurrence, theoretically next December. So it's a lot of jawboning so far. We'll have to see if it actually develops at all, or if it's even meaningful by the time we get there. The political fracturing that we're going to be going through, the political crises that we're going to be involved in, may mean that such artificial organizations or let's say NGOs, okay, non-governmental organizations that are nonetheless supported by governments and so on, may just fall away because they're at the height of the destruction of the empire, and they are truly only needed for growth of that empire into the future. And if the empire starts dying, we're going to see a lot of this stuff just fall away.
Well, when I think of the pie chart for all the U.S. spending, 60% is military. So imagine that.
Yeah, that's going to fall away as well. The dollar it's going to be real interesting, because the dollar, just like in 1930s, is going to gain in value. So in purchasing value, this will be temporary. Then we're going to see a dollar in the U.S., and then the dollar as a reserve currency will go away. But I think we'll still use dollars here in the U.S. for a number of years. But their purchasing power is going to be suspect, I think, as it was in the 1930s. But the curious part of all of this is the positioning that everybody's got going by everybody, I mean the global players in the banking community, around the precious metals and so on. Because we see the major banks buying large stocks of silver and, buying into gold and so on. They know this is coming. And the expectation is that on their part, that they're going to have that which will be required to continue business after this shift. So, for instance, we're even now seeing places like the banks in Barbados, Bahamas, and so on start to consider the idea of holding as an asset Bitcoin to continue beyond. And why? Well, because these are tax haven centers whose function really is the settlement and the movement of large amounts of money. And if money resolves, if currency dies and we go back to money, it's not feasible to be shipping around large amounts of silver or gold, especially in a planet torn apart by political chaos. But if you had a gold to Bitcoin kind of thing, wow, that's just perfect for the powers that be, and coincidentally also perfect for the populace. This is one time where the coincidence works for both of us. The powers that be, if Bitcoin didn't arise naturally, would have had to invent something similar, because it's not going to be feasible to be shipping gold around the planet anymore. It'll be done by Bitcoin settlement to local exchange, that kind of thing, simply because of the political chaos that's going on.
And I remember a few years ago, you gave me my first Bitcoin, and we did almost an entire show. I was even accepting subscriptions with Bitcoin, and to be honest, I got out of all of it before it dropped below 500. Today is at 363. I don't want to spend too much time on Bitcoin, but where do you stand on Bitcoin now?
You're going to kick yourself when they go to millions of dollars per Bitcoin.
Really? You're that bullish?
No, that presumes an emotional attachment to it. I don't have an emotional attachment to Bitcoin. It's going to go up and down. It's going to crash, but it's a true market. And if I just look at the analysis and the amount of if I just look at it this way, 1%, the Forex is the largest market on the planet. These are the people that trade currencies back and forth.
Right.
I'm presuming all paper currencies and all their derivatives are going to die. That volume will have to be taken up by something, okay? Right now, if Bitcoin was to take up only 1/2 of 1% of the Forex volume, each Bitcoin would have to be $150,000. That's 1/2 of 1% of the Forex volume. So whatever mechanism, whatever vehicle that is going to be used to do the settlement that is normally done at the level of the Forex market is going to be worth staggering amounts of money, simply because it has to take into that volume. Even if we were to say that we're going to go into the worst depression ever and that all volumes on all markets are going to drop by 90%, we're still looking at each Bitcoin being on the order of maybe $10 million.
Filling the void, filling the vacuum.
Correct, because you got to have something. You got to have, everybody talks about a reset and so on. Well, this stuff develops as we need beforehand, right?
And the data sets showing that a movement, quote-unquote movement, will begin in 2016 that will be quasi-global in that it will sweep throughout the dying dollar empire. What is that?
Well, there's two of them, actually. There's, hang on a second. There's three emotional movements that we've seen that'll go through the dollar empire. One of them is going to be it's going to lead to this bifurcation of the currency relative to the dollar itself. So we're going to see people outside of the U.S. and even within the U.S. start to get to the point where they're going to reject the currency itself, the actual paper dollars. There's several different subsets that tell us that this is going to occur, and they also point to differing reasons for it to occur. So we'll see some, basically it's all political in one sense, and that you'll see a lot of people reject the dollar because of the actions of the power cabal from Washington, D.C., in the Middle East that will be occurring in the early part of 2016 that get out of hand. And they're going to reject because it'll just be, they don't want to be tainted. They don't want to use anything, don't want to have anything to do with the United States. It's going to change the global perception where even though maybe a quarter of the populace of the planet hates us, they still want to move here, right? That kind of thing. That's going to go away. There's also this other movement relative to the dollar empire that's going to be coming on out, and that's going to lead up to the political fracturing. And that's, again, it all comes down to an easy statement to make, and that is they, meaning the Federal Reserve, have done something to the money, and nothing has been right since then. And all of the social disorder, all of the social tensions, the cultural tensions, even the forced immigration, the changes in the laws to allow large immigration populations to be moved in, all of these things all go back to the degradation of paper currencies. Because we find ourselves at an interesting, although potentially horrific, crux point in human history. And the crux point is the change from a type 0 civilization to a type 1 civilization. And the powers that be want us to go on and become a type 2 civilization relative to how we use energy. So they want us to start doing things at a planetary level and not be tribal, geographically, physically, and emotionally connected peasants, okay? They want their peasants. They want us to be their workforce, but it causes them problems if, for instance, you identify yourself as any kind of a geographically bound group.
No sovereignty, no borders, basically.
Correct, basically. And what they have to do is they've got to create basically a megatropolis idea where we're all scrabbling and in competition with each other. They control the power pyramid that you want to step up on in order to achieve a better life. And in doing so, your efforts further their efforts because they're bleeding energy off of you. Now, there's also the idea that there's three competing bosses, three different kinds, that we're a proxy civilization, the way that the U.S. and Russia are battling in Syria with proxies initially can be viewed as Earth, and that Earth is a proxy situation in which there's three competing alien civilizations that are making their agendas known here on Earth through us in the various different kinds of conflicts and so on that are going to develop. If that's the case, it doesn't alter the emotional growth within the idea that we're going to move into a non-bordered, non-politically identified with a geographic region world. They don't want me to be an American or a Northwester. They want me to just think of myself as an Earther. And they have to make that transition linguistically as well as emotionally, because if we're Earthers, then it implies basically we're thinking of ourselves as not me in the United States against potentially some guy in Canada or Mexico, but rather me and all the other Earthers against somebody who's not on this planet.
In theory, that's not bad, but that brings me back to the Werner von Braun message that he conveyed to Dr. Carolyn Rawson when he said first going to be the Cold War, then the boogeyman, then a foreign object coming from space, and finally, the last card, the alien invasion. So we need to have the world united in order to face that quote-unquote invasion?
I don't think that'll be that may be one of the rationales that they use. I don't think they really want to do that. I don't think that the powers that be would like to go down that road at all. Their goal at one level, if you listen, we're speculating when we say that their goal is this and that they have this intent. The evidence is such that they want us to have this one unified human earther face to cope with or deal with something that is external to our terrestrial civilization, whether it's dimensional, whether it's coming from space or wherever, it doesn't matter. We can see that there's patterns and evidence where they're trying to move us into this idea of, Earthers as opposed to geographic parts of Earth against each other. Even though they're using that mechanism, even though they're using the divide and conquer, various different types of ideology and geographic references and stuff against us to get us all stirred up and mix all the ants together to create a new kind of a common ant hill, so to speak. Their goal is to have us face something that is external to us as a species. Whether or not that's coming from space, I think, is actually immaterial. There's now even more evidence with CERN and the Large Hadron Collider and the fact that the Chinese now want to build one, that there's some kind of interdimensional kind of stuff going on here. And so they may be thinking that there's going to be an interdimensional threat. What is clear, though, is that since I started doing this work in 93, I tumbled onto this particular idea, had the first run in 97, and started doing things with these reports since then. Since 97, we've had data sets that show something external and associated with large amounts of fear at the level of the powers that be. So they're very much afraid of something. What it is, we don't know, and any idea towards that is speculation. But within our data sets and within the evidence that presents itself daily, there is massive amounts of fear there. If it's a space alien invasion, you would do certain things. Okay, you might say, let's look for patterns again. All right. So let's postulate that, say, in the 50s, they got wind of somebody coming here in a giant spaceship and that they thought they might be unfriendly, or some circumstances to that end, to where it would be considered to be a warfare kind of a situation, not us against an object, but us against another species, or even the same species from another planet, but us against them from outer space. You would do certain things. There would be certain things that would be advantageous to you as a global power, the one ruling the planet, to have done within the populace. You'd want to have a continuous ready cadre of people that were trained to operate your best weapons continuously, because you know you're going to run into a very high mortality rate as you're invaded by this other force which may be superior to you numerically or technologically. At least you're going to assume that. And so one of the things you may do is introduce large-scale use of simulation technology, always aimed at the latest and greatest of all of the weapons that you have, into the general population and to your very most talented, and use that introduction of simulation technology to withdraw from your general population your most talented, fast-twitch muscle people on that particular kind of weapons. Do we see that? Yes, we do. It's been ongoing for 25 plus years with the military-industrial complex, longer than that, 45 years really, pushing the video game industry. All of the video game industry is extensively supported by the military-industrial complex and all these intelligence agencies. And they are continually upgrading the quality and the intensity of the simulation at a level that is just frightening unless you observe it from this particular view, as training all these people to be ready to defend and fight with weapons that are basically fast-twitch muscle, little computer fly-by-wire control kind of things, right?
It's a recruitment tool.
Correct. And it's also training a huge cadre of reserves, because your first batch of the best are all going to get killed off. And you know this ahead of time. As a war-based society, you know that all plans end up destroyed the first contact with the enemy, so you got to have your reserves. And so you build the whole population of the planet as basically your reserves against this sort of a thing. What else would you do? Well, you might try building a lot of underground bases, because there's been existence on our planet, or there's evidence on our planet of populations in excess of millions who lived for years, decades underground. These underground civilizations extend all the way from Turkey all the way to England. There's tunnel connections to them all throughout Europe. There's huge areas where 20 and 30 and 40,000 people lived at a time, with grain stores and livestock and all of this in giant warrens, very deep under the ground. So, people have done that in the far distant past. Maybe it's something we would do now. Do we see evidence of this? Yes, we do. We see that vast quantities of our cement is going underground, just disappearing out of the economy. Some 9.5% of all of the cement that we produced at the height of the booming of the building period here in the United States didn't show up in any houses, didn't show up in any above ground construction that we can find anywhere. And
or China.
Correct. And at the same time, there was no sign of it showing up in the governmental infrastructure. They weren't using the cement to build new roads or pilings or any of this kind of stuff. It just disappeared. And that went on year after year after year after year. In some areas, it was as high as 25% of all the cement just simply disappeared out of the local environment after being created. So something is going on. Deep underground bases exist. We know this. They're global. All the social orders, or all the societies, are building them. We have seed vaults. We have everything set up for Earth versus something, okay? And I don't think that something is a big rock. The way they're structuring it here, there'd be no need to have the huge amount of investment from the military-industrial complex into the gaming industry to support the amount of people we have running drones. And in fact, you wouldn't want that technology to spread unless you presumed that all of your drone operators were going to die and you needed to get some new ones, and they needed to be mostly trained all ready to go. So you didn't have this big learning curve, because our use of drone technology now does not suck up anywhere near the amount of people we've got that are training to operate all these different kinds of equipment in the form of the video games. So there's some other agenda going on there that I don't see us fighting a big rock. I think that the powers that be expect or are preparing for us to actually deal with a real invasion, which gets us back to the molds. In one of our data sets, at some point in 2016, it's going to occur to somebody And see, these are things I can talk about because I don't think they're going to be self-fulfilling. I don't think that my words that are in this interview are going to be widespread enough to cause this reaction itself. I think that the reaction that is going to appear in 2016 is going to be entirely natural and native to the circumstances in spite of our talking about it now. But what's going to occur is that we're going to get a mold infestation at various different levels in our infrastructure. We're even going to find it attacking fuels and plastics. And that's going to be very deadly because it's going to cause electrical shorts and stuff as particular kinds of protein-based plastic wire insulators that have been used in the last 20 years are degraded by this mold and basically ed up.
Is that the same mold that's going to be attacking women's wigs?
Correct. And it's all based...
Please proceed to part 3. Is that the same mold that's going to be attacking women's wigs?
Correct. And it's all based... See, here's the thing. It's all based on a protein, okay? It's all based on a mold that goes after proteins. And unfortunately, we've been using soy protein to make insulators and plastics and stuff from the GMO world for a number of years now. We even use various different kinds of proteins to make oils, specific kinds of oils that are used in machining and very high performance, very technical kind of things like chip creation and this sort of thing. They don't use petroleum to lubricate those machines. And it's an entirely different world there. And that world is going to suffer very badly as a result of this mold, which will also start showing up in wigs. It'll start showing up in other effects. And in the wigs, it's going to be really nasty because the mold will have one fungus kind of a parameter that we will see, and that is spores. And the spores are showing as causing brain damage, literally like behavior problems. I don't think we're talking Zombieville here, but probably people that are going to be primarily women that will be so intoxicated, literally suffering in a toxic state because their wigs are giving off spores. And their minds are going to go, and they're going to become a social problem to the point where we're going to see instances of seemingly random assaults by women that will end up with their death and confrontation with police. That will take a long time, maybe 6 months, for all this stuff to become known. So over the course of 2016, we may start seeing women being shot. Women behaving really, really, really bizarrely, taking cars and, trying to drive them up trees for all I know. Just stuff that's totally beyond any understanding that will lead to a lot of women coming into it, mostly in individual cases, but in some instances in small groups that will come into the public attention via their interaction with and confrontation with a lot of the law enforcement and other social services as a result of the bizarre behavior, which will eventually be tracked back down to the mold spores in the wigs, in the hair. And so a couple of years, nobody will be selling and buying hair because this is going to be a persistent kind of a problem. Now, here's the other really what I found just fascinating part of it all. The Space Goat Farts entity keeps coming back and saying that there are delivery vehicles that are being injected into our atmosphere for delivering the mold, and that the mold is actually a weapon, and that it's here to soften us up and get us all degraded, remove electrical infrastructure and remove wigs. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that was the plan, but it's just a side effect. But it's one of the more notable ones because of the emotional component that's going to show up with these women having protein damaged scalps and, brain damage and so on. It'll be highly visible by the time we get into the latter part of 2016. And then people at a scientific level, not you and I, but at a scientific level, will start making the connection. Now, will the powers that be make this connection ahead of all of that and simply not tell us? There's even hints towards that they will discover that it's a weapon long before the rest of us do.
An offshoot of The Walking Dead right there. But let's talk about the markets now. The Federal Reserve makes a bad decision. Does that mean they're raising rates a quarter of a point or leaving it as is? And you say a rise in interest rates will be as destructive as not raising them.
Correct. It won't matter. Because of the issue is basically emotional. It's not an issue of money. It's not an issue of things or prices or values. It's an issue of confidence. They will make a decision. The data is saying that whatever it is they decide will, in retrospect, turn out to have been the wrong decision. But it won't matter if we're at that point in history where if they raise rates, they're going to cause problems. And if they don't raise rates, they're going to cause problems. And the fact is we're headed for these problems because of these past 30 plus years. So the dithering about raising or not raising is actually immaterial to what's going on.
And you see a Chinese scientist rising to global prominence. What is the reason for this rise?
We think that the guy is going to. Now you're talking about the one that's south of Mongolia?
Yes.
Yes. We think that this guy's going to come on up as a result of a happenstance. Okay, the happenstance is going to produce a discovery relative to archaeology, and the scientist is going to be incidental to that discovery. The discovery is going to have to come first, and that'll end up propelling the guy to prominence. The discovery is going to be really cool itself because it looks like the Chinese are going to discover, as we were discussing earlier, the remnants of an underground social order and society. And when they discover it, it's not going to be as we've seen in the past of empty old caves. And this will actually be an underground facility, not merely a village that got, a lot of dust blown over it until it's basically buried, and not that kind of an situation. But we're going to discover what amounts to a museum of science and technology of ancient times with some real serious finds, especially because they'll be so well preserved from having been trapped into this, I guess we'd have to say, manufactured. It doesn't appear to be natural. It's not like natural caves. It appears to be a manufactured site. Now, we'll know that when they found this because initially we're going to get, it's not in the report, but initially we're going to get reports that'll come on out of rumors of workers passing out and dying as they go into these places because of the bad air. And they won't recognize that. Now, this bad air issue showed up in the previous report, and it's part of the subset that has grown to support this. Does that make sense? So we've had 2 reports now of instances of people walking into and crowds being affected by bad air, and this subset is part of that. These people are going, and China will discover a underground civilization remnant that is so well sealed that the air's gone stale and bad, and they'll have to deal with that, not knowing initially, though, they're going to walk into it unprepared.
If Chris Carter from the X-Files is listening, I bet you he'll make that part of a script if the X-Files goes beyond the upcoming 6 episodes. Now, many people in Europe, our brothers and sisters in Europe, many people in Europe feel they're being invaded and their culture is being decimated. We're seeing this leaning towards the right now. A lot of Eastern European countries are refusing to accept refugees. Will the Europeans say enough is enough? And I don't think a population should change their culture to adopt or to adapt to newcomers. It should be the other way around. What's going on there that you see?
This is, again, the part of the idea of making us all into earthers. They don't want to have Swedes. They don't want to have Belgians. They want to have us all just be earthers as humans. They want to have us be as spread out, as homogenous as possible, seen from a large viewpoint. But
it seems they want us to be Muslims. That's what it seems.
No, it isn't that so much. It isn't that. That would actually work to their benefit if we were all of a single religion. That would aid them at this particular junction in time. Usually they don't like that because they need the divide and conquer in order to keep us scrapping with each other and yet supporting them. However, we're running into this juxtaposition, like I was saying, where they need us all to be facing outward as a more or less unified whole, and you don't get that. So first they have to break down the cultures in order to not have, or in order to basically have the Swedes stand side by side with a Muslim fellow and with a Norwegian, with a North African, all facing this greater threat. They are of the opinion, this is my opinion, that the patterns I'm seeing suggest that whoever is doing this is of the opinion that strong family and national associations are not in their interest, and they must first totally shatter the cultural glass in order to get their goals met. I'm not saying this is positive or has to be done that way. I'm of the opinion it need not exist this way to achieve their goal, but nonetheless, this is the path that they've chosen. So you're actually going to start seeing, excepting Russia, you're even going to start seeing a push for massive immigration into parts of China as certain things occur in the area of the Black Sea and, the upcoming war with Turkey and all this other stuff that's going to go on. It's going to push even larger populations into China. And China's already got enough problems. They're going to have a big reaction to it as well. But it's global. the impact is of trying to force the immigration is global. The people that are in charge of this, the boss, is even going to take advantage of the reverse wave of immigration that's currently going on down into Mexico to create or to augment it and get a diaspora, a scattering of the people from northern hemisphere to start immigrating to the south. Why this should be the case goes to their intent, and that's where we're into speculation. But we do see these patterns. So they want the culture to shatter. What they're not going to be prepared for, according to the data, is going to be the type of reaction that they're going to get and how it's going to spread throughout the planet, sort of building on each other. So in other words, our data has shown for like the last, maybe year or so of really bad behavior, if you're politically correct, coming out of the Swedes. Very archetype Swedish behavior is going to start coming out of the Swedish population.
It's already happening.
Yeah, well, we're going to see something that's going to be like Viking-like in the sense of, no prisoners, people slaughtered, the whole thing. It's going to be disgusting. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be visceral. The powers that be are going to try and use it. The populaces of Sweden and other parts of Europe are going to be shocked by it, but it's going to be a necessary cathartic experience to bringing all of the issues out in the open for everyone, including making the Swedes look at themselves in a way they've never had to do before. And that, once they start being honest with themselves, is what leads to this anti-wave for the immigration. So all of the vast quantities of Muslims that we see moving in now from Syria, 2 years from now are going to be heading the other way. It's going to be in a different situation than we have with the Mexican population here. Mexican population here is going to flee because of the job participation rate crashing, the employment rates crashing, the dollar crashing, and the political chaos, which makes their lives untenable, especially with the breakdown of the welfare system. In Europe, the Muslims are going to be fleeing from a hardcore or from a hardened core people's response. So we're going to start seeing instances of gun smuggling arise, and you'll start seeing the powers that be throughout Europe start declaring such and so a group of people in Sweden as being a radical party of terrorists that are somehow linked with the such and such a group of people in Austria, that are somehow linked with another group of people in Poland and in all these other various countries. And so basically they'll be bringing up the old idea that we saw in the 70s of the terrorist union. Sorry, the what? Like the IRA, more or less? Correct. How the IRA was messing about with North African terrorists, all this kind of thing, and how they're all in cahoots with each other. That's the kind of thing that will be touted as a result of the actions that will be popping up. And what it really is all these independent peoples that are all share a particular kind of a view relative to their genetic heritage are going to rise up and start pushing the Muslims back. This will not be good. I mean, people are going to die. It's going to be quite brutal and horrific. It's not going to be as the powers that be want it, which is that we accept the immigration. It shatters the society. We all turn into earthers, and yet we sort of all live with each other. And by the way, I don't mean to interrupt you, but a lot of people, when we have these conversations, may say, you sound like a bunch of racists. And folks, we're not racist, but I have to say, I respect those people who have their traditions completely shattered right now. I know they're trying to be compassionate about it, but take Germany, for example. German towns, Clif, authorities are seizing vacation property, something, people have a second home. They come in and then all of a sudden they can't even go in because they have refugees being housed there. Even evicting people from their own houses to house refugees. How much will they be pushed until they say enough? Same with the French, who have about 150 Sharia no-go zones, and there are many other throughout Europe. Yeah, and we're going to start seeing those battles now. I've got friends of mine that are Swedish coders I've met, and I did a big job for British Airways and BEC Marconi when there were like maybe 500 or 600 programmers on staff. And at my level, a lot of the people were, I was dealing with, from my viewpoint, a lot of Europeans, but some of the people out of India as well. But a lot of the group at the senior level were Swedish on this particular project. And some of those guys I've been in contact with. And this one fellow who's he's like 15 years younger than I am. So that put him in his 40s. He has just purchased for his 9-year-old daughter a handgun. Because he says And he told her, don't shoot yourself. Shoot, if they try and rape you, he said, just shoot them. Just keep shooting until all of the bullets are gone. You got a 13 in there, and then run. And he's been telling me this, that, his wife, traditional, Swedish blonde, hacked off all of her hair and dyed it black.
Wow.
And she carries a gun wherever she goes now. And
is it legal in Sweden?
I don't know. I didn't ask.
Because, last time I checked, absolutely. I mean, I'd rather go to jail but be alive and keep my family safe. But I post these things on Facebook, for example, and you get a lot of the Europeans attacking me. I cannot believe, Mel, that they just don't understand that we're the last bastion over here. But anyway, England pop.
Let's stop for a second,
yes,
and deal with the issue of racism, okay? This is really key to my life. As a kid, I was a military brat. I was raised among people of all kinds, all different kinds of races. My parents were not racist. My father was from Missouri. He was a native Missourian, and he lived in Walker's Hollow, Missouri. And my family in Texas, in Tyler, Texas, there's
no wonder you say Missouri.
A lot of highs down in Texas and Missouri that are black. Okay, that are relatives of mine, and I have relatives of mine that have Indian blood. We've got a relative of mine that's Japanese. So, and I was never raised as a racist. And I'll tell you some interesting parts of this. As a kid, the military was used in the South to integrate schools because their thinking was, well, hell, you people, from the Southerners' viewpoint, you people live with blacks all the time. You can go to school with them and you won't bother us. And then the local population can just go to the white schools. And so all my life, I've been in the position as a child up until I was like 19 or 20 of actually being a minority. So I was a minority in some of the military academies I went to, which were primarily black. At the time, we had a good, solid black middle class in the U.S., which doesn't exist now. But I was also a minority in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. I am a racist. I have to say that. And I say it proudly because I'm for the human race. Any subdivisions smaller than that,
there you go.
I don't think really matter. They don't matter much. The difference between the melanin impaired and the melanin rich is like, big deal. We all have the same thinking and all have the same destiny. So, my brother is every person on this planet, and my sister is every female person on this planet, regardless of their color and so on. It just doesn't make any difference. But there are people that are xenophobic, and they key in on these issues, and they, I think, fall. The majority of racial divisions, I think, fall within that 75% that just goes along to get along and is directed to do what they want. So
a lot of it is ignorance too.
Correct. And we will see that as it emerges. But I think that the powers that be are actually trying to engender and engineer the other approach. I think that we'll start seeing language show up over these next few years that you'll see increasingly some term that will try and be omni-humanity focused, like earther or something, and you'll start seeing that they'll try and whittle away all these divisions as a separate component of the shattering of the culture.
But this is why inclusion and diversity comes along, I guess.
I believe so as well. And I think that they're trying to make us into a class 1 planetary where we use all the resources of this planet and go off planet and start using other resources. And we'll know that this is also the case because we're going to see some new impetus on the powers that be part to get us into space mining. So as you see more and more language pop up in various different kinds of press about mining asteroids or capturing asteroids or getting materials from the moon, this kind of thing, you'll know that they're really pushing us along that particular track, which leads to Earthers versus the universe.
I've seen websites of companies who are hiring people who don't mind leaving for years and may not come back. But I want to pile through the few questions we have left quickly. England pop. You say something big is coming in England. What is coming for England?
I don't know. It's unknown. It's in Space Goat parts. It may be a space alien spaceship that crashes onto the road. It might be a giant unknown sea creature that splashes out of the ocean. I don't know. But we have a lot of words for splash and crash associated with a particular roadway in England that's in southern England there near London, which is called the A4. And we should see something in the middle of that, in that roadway, splash up before the end of December.
And before I ask you about China pop, you don't have Japan pop, but since we have a lot of people who listen to us in Japan, and by the way, hello to my Japanese friends, they have what's called Veritas Appreciation Saturdays. They sit down, they all learn English, and they listen to Veritas, and they comment. So my greetings to all of you over there. With Japan abandoning their 70-year pacifist stand, do you have any information about this?
Excuse me. Yes. We actually do have we had a large amount of data from Japan, Indonesia, and Malaysia, but I just couldn't get into it. Same thing with France, Germany, and a lot of these other countries. There's just so much stuff this time. But for Japan, they're in a world of hurt over these next few years. The shift into the military
recession already.
Yeah, correct. And it's going to get worse. And it's going to part of that is the thinking on their part of the government that they can build weapons to build their way out of the depression. Their problem is they're facing what has already occurred, and that is a mental mind shift within the populace of Japan itself. They've gone through some kind of demographic change over the last 20 years or 30 years of this ongoing depression, and it's actually affecting the each and every generation that's being born. Independent of the demographics that would go on otherwise. So in other words, before the recession that started in the 90s in Japan, we had an aging Japan, but its new population, the kids and so forth, were dynamic, outwardly facing, aggressive. It's at that point of time, even though their population was demographically aging and they were due to head into a spending period, nonetheless, at the time we were always, Japan bought Los Angeles, Japan's buying New York, this
Hawaii.
kind of thing, right? Exactly. Japan has all the money, they're buying everything. Well, look how quickly that faded. That faded not only economically, but also as a cultural meme of Japan outwardly focused. Now we're seeing that the military-industrial complex within Japan being used by the politicians at this point to try and get them out of their economic problems.
Yeah.
More than any kind of external threat. They're not really
that's
worried
what
about
Thatcher did with England.
Correct. Exactly so. But here they've run into a problem in Japan, and that is that their populace is not supporting it. Their populace has changed to the point where it is undergoing a turning, like a fourth turning, like that book. And so there's a big social a change there that is antithetical to the way that the government wants to go. So you'll see the big push towards militarized Japan fall away relatively rapidly. The young people are just simply not supporting it.
Yesterday, secession efforts surfaced in Texas once again. Will this movement continue, and how serious will it get?
It's going to get to the point where the U.S. Fractures, where we get into this fracturing process that will undoubtedly lead, if it continues on the course it's on now, without any intervention, to a breakup of the continental United States as a single corporation. We won't operate under the Washington, D.C. We'll see at least there's going to be a conjunction of influences here. Not only are the EBT, the welfare system, is going to crash, and we're going to start seeing states refuse to pay for mandated welfare from the feds. They're just going to say, take a hike. We can't afford this. Y'all go away. And it's going to cause local problems within the states, which they're going to try and deal with. At the same time that's going to go on, there's going to be a big push to resettle thousands upon tens of thousands of, quote, refugees, all of which are Muslim, into isolated areas in the western states. Now, the data is suggesting that we're going to have a mutiny in the Air Force, a revolt in the Army, and at least 5 states are going to tell the federal government to take a hike and close their borders relative to any immigration, any kind of person coming in without proper travel ID. And it's going to be, you can't cross from Utah to any other state without showing your Utah driver's license or passport or whatever, if you're trying to get into Utah. So in other words, they're going to be very, very, very restrictive about transiting through, because they don't want the problems that are trying to be forced on them as part of this cultural shattering. I picked Utah deliberately because that's going to be one of the hardcore stand states because of its
moments.
Correct. The monolithic nature of their belief system in that area is going to lead to them being one of the first, but they're not going to be the last, and they're not going to be alone. This is going to be in conjunction with the molds arising, which is also going to shut down interstate travel and cause economic hardship, which also is going to be one of the things that's going to be cited. And then we have this other issue of, I can't really say it's temporally ahead of it or not. We just don't know because the data sets are so wide removed and there's just so much data. It's kind of a guess as to when it's going to show up. But there's going to be some kind of a global warming issue that's relative to ocean currents. And the powers that be are going to try and force about 1.5 million probably Pacific Islanders to relocate to the Northwest or to the West Coast of the U.S. And they're basically going to take a couple of small countries and they're going to try and relocate the population. And there's going to, at the same time that this is going on, we're going to see this push to get the Muslim populations relocated into the Western states. At the same time, we have all of these other things happening, and that's what leads to this fracturing and breakdown. But this is not the fracturing of the political process that I speak of in other aspects of the report. That has to do with the political process towards the presidential election and the two-party dictatorship that I've lived under all my life. And it's going to be shattered.
That was my next question. What do you see for presidential election next year?
We're going to see the shattering of the political process and the falling of the powers that be as a result of that shattering, very much in a very similar fashion as we saw in the collapse of the old Soviet Union. And that is to say that they came to a time when, in spite of their mandatory, just before the White Revolution, in spite of their mandatory elections, everybody had to go and vote. They had a time when vast quantities of people did not. And that's when they realized that they had a real significant issue. And the next thing you know, everything starts totally degrading around them. I think we're going to get to something similar to that. There's data suggesting that we're going to get into March and April, have a really severe step down, not a crash per se, because it's all grinding downhill, but a big step downward in the currencies that's going to affect the equities and the bond market and all that kind of stuff here in the U.S., which is going to put real pressure on the powers that be because they won't be able to pay for stuff. And it's also going to start depriving the political parties of all of the graft and the money that keeps them going. And so we're going to see a shift of power there. So will Hillary and Trump be actually running for president, and will it be meaningful? I don't know that either of those people will actually end up running in spite of them getting the nomination of the respective parties. They may well go through the process in summer, and then by the time we hit September, both of those parties may be either broke or irrelevant, and the whole process may be abandoned for all I know. The data sets are suggesting that the political process will begin its fracturing with the concurrent with the temporal markers of the economic events in March and April, but that fracturing is going to be hyper-accelerated with the hyperinflation that comes in mid-June, July. So we're going to reach a point where the Federal Reserve is going to be so freaked out about what's going on economically that instead of, $1 trillion a month that they're going to do, they're going to start doing $1 trillion a day. It won't start off as $1 trillion a day. It'll be maybe $1.5 trillion a month. And then next month it'll be $5 trillion. And then it'll be $2 trillion a week. And then pretty soon it'll be $1 trillion a day. At that level, the chaos of the hyperinflation is going to subsume and overwhelm the political process. Because even though, let's pick on Hillary, even though Hillary has vast quantities of bribes and blood money that she's obtained from having people killed all around the planet in various different forms, and is a multimillionaire, those millions will mean nothing when the dollar is so hyperinflated that no one will print advertising for her because you're not able to come up with an effective contract to be settled in dollars.
Could that be considered a state of emergency? And if so, can it allow the suspension of the elections?
I don't know that they'll go that far. I have not got data in here saying that the elections are going to be suspended. There's a whole lot of stuff talking about the chaos of the elections and the surrounding infrastructure and its degradation and so on. But will they use it as an excuse? I don't know about that component of it, but there's a lot of stuff saying that the elections won't be as meaningful as people think they are now. So we'll have to wait until we get more data and get further into the year before we can actually start making guesses about what's going to happen relative to the process. I do know that we're going to hit this massive wall of hyperinflation and chaos that will go from March through into late July. Not that the hyperinflation is going to stop, but its most telling emotional impact will occur at that point. And so that's when the contracts break down. That's a real problem for the U.S. and for the population as a whole, but we should see by then smarter corporations are already moving into the blockchain and the Bitcoin world to do their settlement and are moving away from the dollar. This is why I don't think that the IMF and the basket inclusion for the renminbi yuan is meaningful. It's because by the time we get into anything to where they actually could include that into a basket, who will care about SDRs because we're using Bitcoin, gold, and silver and not dollars and yuan anyway. So it's just going to be a really strange world. The dollar component is so key. The destruction of the currencies is so key to everything that's happening now and will happen over these next few years that we cannot overstate its importance, and nuances in what happens to the currencies will cause vast changes in our social order. So we actually have data going to the idea that I'll just pick a date that shows up in model space, and you have to understand we're dealing with a scatter graph, so it's not like a definitive line, it's not like a candlestick, it's more like a spread range. And so the peak of these things at the early rush of it shows about June 16th or so, okay? So about June 16th of this coming year, we're going to get to a point where contracts break down in the U.S. because you won't be able to guarantee payment in an effective purchasing power media. So you might sit there and order propane, a tank of propane for your restaurant, assuming you own a restaurant and you cook with propane. But the propane company will say, how are you going to pay for it? And you say, well, I'll give you $. And the propane guy says, well, okay, but the price on the propane right now is $25 a gallon, but I'm going to have to charge you $50 a gallon because by the time I get my truck out there and dump it into your tank, it'll have gone up. Are you prepared to pay the $50 a gallon? And the guy will freak out and say no, or he will pay or whatever. But the point being that all the kinds of standard, stable sort of contract settlement kind of stuff is just simply going to be under severe stress, and it's going to affect everything, including things like political advertising.
And we just have one last question for the ALTA report and just a couple of questions from people from the audience. And this one, Space Code Farts, what about strangeness on UFO wave, contactees, and mass sightings in China? What are these, and will the authorities know how to cope with this?
I think the Chinese authorities, let's take the latter part of that. The Chinese authorities are a lot more savvy than our guys are, at least insofar as they're letting on. Our guys may indeed be very savvy, but our political leaders may be in the dark, and we may have a really effective, good breakaway civilization that's good at dealing with the space aliens. I think the Chinese, on the other hand, the government is a little bit more factual and upfront about it because they're engineers. They're not lawyers and sneaky bastards. So the Chinese are experiencing this UFO wave because of certain circumstances that will also, as a part of all of this, lead to that discovery south of the Mongolian border of this remnant civilization. There's activities going on in China that are attractive to the UFOs at the moment. And also you have to look at it this way. You come here from some other place, you're interdimensional or outside our solar system, doesn't matter, or even from Mars or whatever. If you wanted to see what's going on Earth, you'd go to where the action is. Where's the action? Where all the people are. Where are all the people? China. So you'd naturally gravitate to China anyway. And we're seeing this more and more now that we have a more ubiquitous energy signature. So in the 50s and 60s, there may have been a flurry of UFO activity in China that was simply unreported and we just didn't know about it. Or it could be that there was very little to be seen there because their energy signature as a populace was relatively low compared to the stuff that was going on in the southwest of the U.S. where we had, and even the northwest of the U.S. where we had tons and tons and tons of UFO activity. So the UFO activity, it's all related to what we're categorizing as space alien wars. And I'm using space alien just to differentiate from, immigrant alien kind of thing. But all of our data is increasingly coming to the idea that the alien wars meme is going to move up to the forefront of consciousness, and we're going to have actual demonstrable evidence that stuff's happening in the sense of UFO sightings are going to lead to contacts and physical evidence of UFOs, and that 2016 is going to be a really weird year that way because disclosure is going to happen, but nobody's going to come on out and say that there's space aliens at, the UFO or at the Obama level. They may react to someone else saying it and may agree with it, but they're not necessarily going to be the point of origin. But all of that stuff really does look like it's coming out this coming year.
And this is a long question because he had to phrase it this way. So bear with me. This is Mark from Landberg, Pennsylvania, big fan of yours. He says, the volume of material on the flat earth subject continues to grow on the internet, and your rebuttal in August's ALTA Q&A session of the flat earth model and defense of a spinning globe earth in a spiral galaxy per Dr. Bat's model was less than compelling. In the Todd model that says that we're a spherical planet that's over 24,000 miles in circumference, spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, with a sun that's 109 times the size of the Earth and 93 million miles away, why does the horizon always rise to eye level when flying? Why are we, bear with me because it's a long question, why are we able to view Chicago from across Lake Michigan and ships able to see lighthouses from as far as 60 miles away? Why have engineers and pilots never taken into the account any curvature of the Earth? Have you ever seen a curved water level? And how do the periscopes ever view ships many miles away? If our commercial airplanes fly at 500 miles per hour and the Earth is spinning counterclockwise at 1,000 miles per hour, how could our current air travel routes and times be possible? Why are we able to view clouds behind the sun during sunrise and sunset? How do you explain angled crepuscular rays from a sun 93 million miles away? If the stars are at different distances from the Earth, why do their distances relative to each other never change? And lastly, why do we never see any satellites in NASA's images taken from beyond the satellite's orbital ring? I've got at least 100 more questions, but these should do for now.
Let's take the one about NASA. I won't comment on what NASA produces because they do a lot of lying, so I can't say why what the rationale is for anything that shows up from NASA. The rest of it, though, is relatively easily taken into account. You'll be able to find that all of the flat Earth stuff that relates to vision, horizon, laser light, any of this stuff fails to understand what light is and how it works. So none of the people that are doing the flat Earth stuff have even thought about this part of it. We do not see light. We've never seen light. We'll never, ever see light. They don't understand what it is to be human, and therefore they're making certain observations outside of themselves without understanding how they themselves affect the observations. And until they understand how they affect the observations, all of their, quote, science is bogus. So in other words, the idea of why does the horizon rise up to meet our eyes should be rephrased. Why is it that our eyes seek out the horizon and bring it up to your brain? Until you understand that you'd have no control over your eyes. Now, let's take them as a specific, okay? First off, humans only have 4 senses, not 5. The, quote, sense of touch has no sense organ behind it. It is part of your body. It's your feelingness, your ability to receive sensation in consciousness. And it is not a sense in the meaning of your sight, sound, taste, and smell. Those are the only senses you have. They're all located in your head. This is true of all predators. It's true of all greater consciousness beings, that we all locate all of our sense organs in our heads. Now, the sense organs of the eyes never, ever, ever present to you light. So you never see the raw light on the planet. What you're seeing is a highly interpreted creation of your mind trying to make sense of all of these inputs coming into you. So until you understand how light reacts to your eyes and what your eyes are doing, all of your questions relating to why can I see this relative to the curvature are totally spurious because you don't even know what seeing is, and you haven't even thought about that. But the simple answer is that light does not travel in a straight line. Light travels with the curvature of those objects that have a sufficient gravity to capture it. And you can even prove this to yourself with a yo-yo of a specific time spinning fast enough. You'll see it causes optical distortions. And so it's actually causing a yo-yo spinning fast enough at the end of a string in like the walking dog that has what's called mexichrome, or the reflecting foil on it, can spin fast enough to cause local optical disturbances that meet your eye. And so you're actually seeing local disturbances of the light that's meeting your eye from a yo-yo.
Are you saying the light is bent by gravity or attracted by gravity?
Correct. Light does not behave as you were told by the scientists. Scientists tell you that light is just going forever in a straight line. BS. Light, the whole of space is absolutely fantastically filled with light. It is so saturated with light that we swim in a universe of light the way a fish swims in a universe of water, and a fish is as ignorant of the water as we are of the light. We never ever see light. We see what the light reflects off of. You got to think about that.
Let me ask
that is true. Given that is true, you can think about this. I won't take up everybody's time, but just cogitate on light and thinking and seeing, and you'll come to one conclusion. We only see what light reflects off of. We never see light itself, including lasers. You're only seeing the atmosphere and the caught in the laser light reflecting off the dust and everything. In an absolute sterile environment with no air movement and everything, you can't see laser light of any color. And this is because the way that your eyes present data to your brains for interpretation. So you never get to see raw universe. Therefore, all of the arguments for a flat Earth require the invention of a highly complex supporting physics that in reality can be broken at any of these given points. Okay, you can choose any of the points that you want to do and break the physics of the flat Earth model by presenting evidence that light bends, it's captured by gravity, it's affected by atmosphere, and so on. I've actually been out in the ocean, and I was miles away from Bremerhaven, port in northern Germany. Atmospherics were, and I'm talking miles. We must have been 35 miles out in a 2-knot shitbox, a boat that just doesn't go very fast, right? And for a full day and a half, we had an image of Bremerhaven upside down, floating up over us several thousand feet in the air. It was the weirdest thing we'd ever seen, and none of us had a camera. This is in the 60s. Cameras and film were very expensive, and I was just not into that kind of thing, and I never put my money that way. So I didn't have it, but it was just a phenomenal kind of an effect. So that kind of thing is the same kind of optical disturbance and distortion of light reflecting off of clouds that gave us the complete image, all of this kind of thing, the whole camera obscura. If you've ever built a camera obscura, which is this Middle Ages kind of a weird sort of a light projection device, you'll see that light does not behave as you think it does. By the means of lenses and tubes and stuff, you can get light to do all kinds of interesting things. So holding up the idea that laser light should bend, that you shouldn't be able to see around the curve of the Earth, all this kind of stuff, it's all spurious because you're not taking into account the various elementals that are within your being that are allowing you to observe this kind of thing. Then I have two absolutely off-the-wall telling components that prove to me that the planet is in fact a oblate spheroid. I know this, by the way, from having done my own math and determined that indeed the planet is much larger at the equator than it is at the poles. Taken that way, I did a bunch of solar observatories and recreated a bunch of famous measure the planet by shadows, all this kind of stuff in the early 2000s. But anyway, here's two things that the flat earther guys can never, ever, ever explain away, and that in no way make sense in a flat Earth model at all. And that is, if you start at the equator and work your way to the poles, north or south, you will notice something that occurs. First off, the closer you are to the pole, the greater the amount of oxygen and in the water, fresh and salt, and the different kind of an oxygen ion arrangement you'll find there. So in other words, the oxygen components of water found at the equator are entirely different than the oxygen components found at water at the poles, and it's a graduated, it's a gradation that goes along as you rise towards the poles. Another thing that does that same thing is the omega-3 ratio of oils in both animals and plants. So in other words, we have omega-zeros oils at the equator, coconut oil, etc., and palm oils. And as you move towards the northern climes, it's also true in the Antarctica, it doesn't matter, but as you move towards the poles, taking the northern hemisphere as an example, we find that, for instance, we get up to the high concentrations of omega-3s relative to omega-6 and omega-9 at the poles. So we see this transition of the fats that are available in life as you go up the planet, as you go towards the poles. Well, what happens on a sphere that's an oblate spheroid covered with an atmosphere in a harsh actinic ray environment as you go towards the poles? The atmosphere thins and you're subjected to more radiation. Thus, you're going to need a different ratio of both oxygen in your water, and it's going to cause that. And you're also going to need a different ratio of omega fats to deal with the radiation environments in the thinner atmosphere. This is why you can get people like myself that are so highly tuned to the area in which I live that I can't take coconut oil. It makes me ill because my body in this environment is tuned to needing the higher omega-3 ratios and not the omega-zeros. Make sense?
It does.
Okay. That would be required, by the way, if we were on a sphere and we were being bombarded by radiation coming in from outer space, because the angle of incidence of that radiation is going to change, and it's going to be harsher as you get closer to the poles. That's why you need the fat differences. That's why there's that oxygen difference.
Since we're talking about this, let me ask you this, and then I have the two more questions, and that's it. But I have to ask you, when I look at the night sky in January, for example, I see all the familiar star systems. During January, the Earth is at a point on its movement around the sun, and I'm looking away from the sun because it is nighttime. Now, 6 months later, the Earth is on the opposite side of the sun, and at night I'm looking out at what I would believe to be 180 degrees in the opposite direction to where I was viewing the night sky in January. However, I see the same star systems. How is that possible if they're now behind the sun opposite my original position?
It wouldn't be possible if that were the case. That's why we do not have a orbit around the sun universe. We don't live in that solar system. Earth has never rotated around the sun. We are dragged behind it. So we're in the cone behind it. So of course we can see all the stars continuously, and they're never going to change relative to us because we're not orbiting around something that's the massive giant sun way the hell out from it, okay? It does not work that way. In fact, we can prove to ourselves that model doesn't exist by all of Dr. Batt's thinking. In other words, we'd never be able, if that were the case, if we actually orbited the sun, we'd only be able to see any of the outer planets for like 2 days out of a year, simply because the sun would always obscure their view from us until they were actually right behind us relative to the sun.
Is this why we see Polaris all the time, the North Star?
Correct, because we're being drugged behind the sun. So we can always see the stars all around us because we don't have the sun between us and them. But get this, we can never, ever, ever see what's on the other side of the sun as it pulls us along. The sun is like a comet, and we're like all the debris in the tail. So we can't see what's on the head of the sun, but we can see all the stars and stuff that are off peripherally around the sun because we're just dragged behind it, and there's nothing obscuring our view.
Like
we
a
know
trail.
this is true, our trail, correct. And we know that this is true, and we can prove that this is true by the eclipse of, or by the retrograde motion of Mercury and Venus seen from Earth. Because Mercury and Venus, when they're retrograde, seen from Earth, actually do this weird stair-step kind of movement relative to us. And it's because we're seeing their spiral. We're not seeing them in a straight line orbiting around the sun. We're seeing them spiraling behind the sun. And from our viewpoint, that spiral in a two-dimensional representation is like a stair-step. So the recent transit of Venus and the transit of Mercury across the sun definitively proved with that motion captured by NASA, which they just let the motion out. There's all kinds of photos of it out there, and it proves that Dr. Bott was correct, that we in fact are being trailed behind the sun as debris in a comet. And if you imagine that, if you just sort of hold your fingers up as the sun and then brought your other hand down and held your fingers back down around the some distance behind the sun, you would see that the sun in no way would obscure the vision, so to speak, of your fingers looking at your nose, if your nose was in fact a star. And the only time that actually would be the case would be as if the sun was between you and that star. Since we never, ever, ever have that condition, we realize the sun is never between us and that star. Therefore, Earth never, ever, ever rotates around the sun. We're being drugged behind it. Any other thinking about that is spurious.
Have you ever seen a real photograph of planet Earth that it's not CGI? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot.
Think about it for a second. And why haven't we commercialized trips to the moon? If everything we've done in the past, I mean, the Wright brothers came out with what they did. Less than a year later, we were flying all over the place. We went to the moon close to 50 years ago, and we haven't commercialized that. We haven't returned to the moon. We have more power in my watch here, my Casio watch that I'm wearing right now, 100 times more than what they had there. That makes you wonder. And also, I saw a rocket recently that broke an amateur rocket that broke the record in altitude. And one thing I noticed, they had the time, if it was Nevada or New Mexico, they had the time, when it stopped and it started going down. Immediately, I saw the moon behind it when the moon should have been over Australia. How is that possible? How could I have seen the moon over the skies of New Mexico or Nevada when it should have been over Australia?
Why should it have been over Australia?
Because at that time, if you map it in the morning, it should have been over Australia, not over the United States.
Well, okay, but The moon's distance from the United States is such that it's never over where I am. Okay, you're in a very unique position because you're down near the tropics. The moon only travels up and down over the equator within the band of the tropics. That's why we have the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So from my viewpoint, I see the moon all the time, but the moon's never over the United States. Never, ever, ever over the United States. As much as it ever goes up is a little tiny bit in Florida. So I'm seeing it here, even though it never rises above the Tropic of Cancer. So it's so far out that, of course, I'm going to be able to see it. I'm going to be able to see it. I wouldn't see the lunation if it was actually over Australia, but the moon never goes over Australia. It never goes south of the Tropic of Capricorn. So the moon will never, ever be over Australia, no matter what the mapping may show you. I'm uncertain as to what you're referring to.
2 more questions and that's it. But I made you think about that CGI picture from NASA because that's all we see all the time. 2 more questions. Do you think the webbot is still a viable tool after the government not only knows about it, but they're actively acting on the internet to spread mis- and disinformation? It seems like their actions would screw up the webbot's perimeters. Thank you, Dave from Louisiana.
That's why I've abandoned the IDIR reports, and I spend the greater part of each month tuning the lexicon to take that into account. You have to understand how this works. I deal with an emotional value that's attached to individual words that are brought back by the webbot spiders. This emotional value is a tunable parameter. When emotions change constantly relative to words, I mean, continuously, there's just a huge amount of work there, even in a normal, non-manipulated kind of a fashion. But when the powers that be get out there and they try and engineer emotion around words, that acts like a big flag for me. And it actually, because we pick up the sudden engineering of the emotions around that word, I can see what they're doing, so to speak, and tune around it. That's why we're actually far more accurate these past couple of months than we have been in the first 6 months of this year. It's because I've abandoned the idea of trying to cope with the data, totally abandoned the idea of producing an immediacy data report, cut my income in half, put us all into basically a kind of a tightened belt situation, and am tuning the lexicon each and every month, whereas before I was doing it maybe 2 or 3 times a year, some years once.
And last question, Clif, whatever happened to your research regarding flamenco's science or fiction in terms of what it really is? Also, what is the data saying regarding the U.S. and world financial and real estate markets? Your data has said before we would see our currency crash time and time again, and I'm still using U.S. paper dollars. Will we see a change soon? Mike from the Big Apple, New York City.
Mike will probably still be using dollars as long as he lives the rest of his life. But
toilet paper?
But exactly, as long as paper is still viable in some means. However, the issue is, like, even already the currency has crashed repeatedly with purchasing power. Even 8 years ago, you could buy so much more with your dollar than you can now. So those forecasts have been quite accurate. It has never ever said that the dollar was going to stop and we would start using, I don't know, storage containers or something. I don't know, a tide or something. It always just said that basically that the dollar was going to crash, and this is all relative to other currencies. And so we are seeing that. What was the other part of the question there?
The flamenco science or fiction?
Yeah, that business. Okay. Yeah. I've just now got the last of those volumes headed towards me. There is vast quantities of accurate information in those books, and I think that the guy is really onto something. There's a lot I disagree with, and like anybody that comes across on a major new discovery like this, pegging the starting point is going to be the issue. So he's accurate. I think much of, quote, history that we've been told is basically BS, foisted on us by someone who's got an agenda going. And it's the same kind of basic problem that we run into in the information age. You can't believe anything because there's too much of it. There's just too much information. So I actually think he's accurate in the main and in the general parameters that he's got out there. But I'm disagreeing with some specifics as to what occurs in what year, because I have other sources of information that I think are equally as valid. Some of the things he doesn't take into account, for instance, are journals and individual diaries and things that do surface over time of people that lived in specific ages that used reference points that were not Western ideological calendar points. So in other words, there's people talking about in their diaries about the eruption of a particular volcano that we can put to a particular period that we can then use as a peg for some of the other stuff that's going on. And Fomenko just didn't reference those kind of greater physical phenomena that can act as time clocks to us, although he's been really accurate with a lot of his astrological stuff.
Last nugget of wisdom you want to impart upon the listeners around the world before we bring you back for season 9, if we're still around.
Well, we may still be around, but radio and the internet may not be viable. We may be doing something else entirely for season 9. I don't know how active and how soon the alien wars thing is going to ramp up, but change is upon us. The only thing, in terms of words of wisdom, the only thing you can do is to watch yourself, because as individuals we're subjected to huge amounts of inputs and new radiation coming in from the sun, a lot of stuff that's going to cause our, in general, going to put pressures on our ability to behave the way we would like to. And so I'm spending a lot of time in sort of like self-preservation, if you will, taking care of myself, making sure my body is capable of withstanding the rigors that are going to be coming to us over these years of struggle. We've got some really, really, really hard times. There's going to be a lot of people that will simply give up and die because they don't strengthen themselves at a core key level now while they have an option. In a couple of years, you may not.
And Clif, how can people buy the new ALTA report and all your reports?
Just head over to Half Past Human and click on the main page. It'll say right at the top, go to buy the latest report, which is the December ALTA as of this point.
Clif, hi. Thank you so much for being part of the show for so many years, being such a good guest all these years. All the best for you and Kathy in 2016.
Thank you very much, Mel. Same to you. And I hope we're back discussing all these strange kind of things in next year in season 9.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And that was Clif High, joining us for another season premiere. I hope you enjoyed it. And even though things ahead may look dire, I've been doing this long enough to always take anything I hear with a grain of salt. Being realistic, but staying positive. Besides, we can only make a difference one day at a time. But most importantly, be your own person. Think critically, and don't let all these events distract you from discovering your mission or turning your dreams into reality. And as always, I want to thank you, Veritas member, for another year on the air, searching for the truth. By now, if you're like me, you're no longer the same person that began this journey in 2008. And I'm excited to have you on board as we continue opening new doors this new season. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank our good and loyal friend Vic Giza for another year bringing a smile with his talent every week. And remember that you can purchase a subscription for a friend or a loved one. And Season 7 is now available on our flash drive. And this time I'll close with this. If you really want to do something, you will find a way. If you don't, you will find an excuse. Thanks for listening. I'm Mel Fabregas. Until next week, be well.